What is up, everybody? Patrick Connor here, and welcome back to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. I'm here with my dude Aris Pina, which means we are here talking boxing history, my friends. Thanks so much for joining us. Whichever medium you chose, whether it's video or audio, go ahead and subscribe. But Aris, what is up, bro? I haven't talked to you for a minute.
Yeah, it's been a minute, bro. I don't know.
Or
I've been
on
up.
the show, anyway, on the show.
Yeah. I've been up since the ass crack of dawn. I was working the Anyway show this morning. So yeah, I'm just working on a few hours of sleep and I don't drink coffee. So let's go.
I couldn't do that. I don't know. There's no way I could do that, bro, because I do drink coffee. I don't drink a ton, but I
Yeah.
do drink coffee, and there's no way I could
No,
do
bro,
that.
I don't drink coffee. I rarely drink soda. I don't do energy drinks anymore. Maybe like what's that shit called? Celsius, whatever. I'll drink that once in a while, but like I'm just kind of a splash water on my face and kind of hope for the best. You know what I mean?
Brutal, bro. Brutal.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it, but kudos to you. Needless to say, bro. I mean, we're here talking about history, but the history is often inspired by or influenced by stuff that's going on now. Thankfully, that wasn't really the case today with Inoue's fight. But we're here talking about unnecessary fights, fights that we didn't necessarily want to see, that kind of thing. So that's not what we were influenced by, not the Inoue fight necessarily. But that being said, I did want to ask you a little bit about the Inoue fight since we're here. What did you think about Inoue's performance? Because I mean, he's one of the top pound for pound guys. Many people think he is the best right now in the world. I mean, he's obviously on a streak.
He looked amazing, bro. I mean, oh, not okay. Amazing might not be the right word, but he's still an incredible talent. Like he just did what he was supposed to do as an elite level fighter. It took him a little bit of, he took rounds, he took his time, figuring out what he was going to do, placing his punches. Nothing was out of sight. Everything was just well rounded. He lost like a round or two. Like round three, he definitely lost. Round four was a little close as well, but like other than that, once you got into gear and figured out, the next course of action, it was just like a one-way traffic over there. And always incredible. I love watching him. He's my favorite active fighter to watch at the moment, and every fight is must see, even if it's against guys that not necessarily you think is gonna have a chance to really beat him. Like Donahay is a good fighter, all right. He may be a little past his best, but he's a former world champion. He's a very experienced guy, and he's a very slick guy. And he showed all those attributes tonight when he was fighting anyway. I mean, the movements he was giving and the feints and everything that's been successful before early in his career
He
was on
wasn't
display.
exactly just standing there, you know?
Absolutely not. I mean, like, he wasn't being super active, but at the same time, when he was throwing, he was being kind of accurate because he was placing his punches well. But in a way, each round, was getting more and more acclimated to what he was doing. And like you got the sense that he never felt he was going to be in trouble, even when he took a few punches from him. So it like some elite fighters like Golovkin, for example, that's a more extreme example because Golovkin would take like three or four or whatever, but like when a guy realizes, especially in elite talent, that the guy that they're in there with can't hurt them or really do anything to them that's gonna like bother them, they don't mind taking a couple of punches if that's what's gonna happen at that point because like they already know what's gonna happen. They can feel it, then it's not gonna bother them. And I got that sense when Inoue soon after, like around round two, round three, round four, he was already getting in control. And that once he really picked up that next gear and started going to the body, I mean, you saw it for yourself, man. He broke the dude's back practically. I'm still not sure how that happened, but they said that Donny said well, like he said he felt something in like his lower back or whatever, but his leg went dead because of it. And that certainly was just because of Inoue's punches. Like that dude was going to town on him near the end. And round six was brutal, absolutely brutal. So, after this, I know they said that they plan on having him fight again in December. I guess against the guy they initially was supposed to fight. It was a Sam Goodman from
Well,
Australia.
I would imagine that there was shooting for New Year's Eve, which tends to be
Yeah,
the big combat sports celebration, end of the year celebration in Japan for
sure.
both mixed martial arts and boxing often.
That's always been a
Um,
tradition. Yep.
yeah, and I think wrestling has often gotten in on it too, if I'm not mistaken. But in any case, yeah, dude, there's no question that what you're talking about earlier when a fighter is aware that the opponent can't really hurt them or isn't going to be able to hurt them, it's a different ball game. And on top of that, the other option or the other side of it is that Inoue really believes in his power. and he knows what his power can do, and that also can change your strategy. It also can lead to, I think, a fight in some bad ways too, obviously, to fighters giving away rounds or kind of like laying back a little bit, knowing like, all right, well, like I can kind of handle this for a little bit, and then when I unleash, that shit's going to do something, and that's exactly what happened. Sure, is it possible that Donnie is like he had some pre-existing like nerve fucking sciatica? I don't fucking know. Sure, it's possible. I don't know what's going on. Maybe he got hit in the hip in sparring and that he
Yeah.
didn't know. I don't know. Jarred a fucking bone loose. Who knows, dude? All I know is that he immediately started holding his back right after Inoue hit the shit out of his body. So I would imagine that probably had a big effect. And I mean, I don't want anybody to get injured or maimed in there by any means. All I know is that watching Naoya Inoue in there throw punches, dude is smooth, such a free flowing puncher when he lets his hands go. That I mean, you basically have to hope that you're somebody in there who can catch him between punches or has enough power to get his ass out of there. Because if you're not, you are in a fucking nightmare.
Even if you're able to, I mean, look, Neri was able to drop him. Nonito Donaire was able to break his eye socket in their first fight and land monstrous left hooks. I mean, I think in a way he's shown his durability now. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he can be hurt and he can be touched a little bit here and there, but I mean, he's proven himself, and that's why he's one
But
of the
there is
best.
a price.
Yeah, and that's insane. You know what I mean? Because that's like the one, like to find a fighter that it's rare to find a fighter that complete when you have the physical aspect of his game where it's just like he's so complete in everything that he does. Offensive wise, his defense is really good too when he decides to really, step it up and make sure he's not going to get touched, the sense of timing, the distance, all that shit. But then, like I said, when he showed he can be hurt, like, he can come back from adversity and take monster punches and not only get up from that or just like, suffer ridiculous injuries that could stop a normal guy and derail their career. I mean, look, you're dealing with an absolute, dare I say it again, monster, because that's like fitting for his name. Like that's what he legitimately is. And I'm glad I'll end it with this. I'm glad that he's not trying to like, after he's unified a division, that he's willing to stay there because he knows his body. Instead of listening to people always trying to push these guys, be like, oh, he needs to move up again. He needs to do this. He needs to fight Tank. I'm surprised a lot of those fans have not gone over there trying to yell about that shit this morning after that fight, or saying that Tank would decapitate him because he got touched or X, Y, and Z. Who cares? I'm not ever thinking about that fight or looking forward to anything like that, right? I mean, there's no reason. The difference of where that's going to be, and I don't see Inoue ever moving himself close to 135. Like he's already close to max out at 122, and he wants to stay there for a little bit. And good for him. I mean, like he's kind of cleaning out the division, but if I heard what was correct, they said that they want to have him fight again in December, and then next year in Vegas with Nakatani on the other on the co-feature, and then eventually have those two fight each other. Is he going to be moving up after? That means he's going to be staying around for a little bit, and I'm totally fine with that. Wherever he wants to be, I'm going to watch. He's an all, he's developing himself. He already has Hall of Fame credentials as it is, as for a young career, which is pretty incredible. And he's gonna, the way he's going on that trajectory, he might be an all-time great. He has to be ranked probably in the top 10 of greatest fighters from Japan of all time now. No,
Easily, probably top five. And
yeah,
obviously, it's tough to say when before a fighter's career is complete. But I'm not going to be one of those wet socks that's just like, well, I can't say because he's still fighting.
yeah,
He's fucking accomplished a lot, dude, in a very short period of time and not very many fights. The only thing really holding him back is the perception of the lower weight classes and the lack of recognition and acknowledgement of lower weight classes by anything even approaching casual fans or the larger fan base or whatever. Anybody who is quote unquote hardcore, anybody who's been watching boxing a long time and is not a total fucking idiot, knows what they're seeing when they're watching Inoue, and that's a very, very, very good fighter, clearly a great fighter, potentially an all-time great fighter. And I
so,
mean, sky's the limit, bro, for sure. And yeah, obviously today was not his most, hallmark performance or biggest highlight or whatever. But again, when he opened up, fireworks happened and
yeah.
pain happened. So
And if you want to compare, like, people just like, oh, that wasn't that great. Like, anyway, he's supposed to be a top talent. He's supposed to blow all these type of guys out. I mean, Sugar Ray Leonard went 10 rounds with Larry Bonds, didn't he? Other guys go like, I'm just using that as a random example off the top of my head. And other, like, Hall of Famers take guys that shouldn't be going that long sometimes. They go rounds with them. You know what I mean? It doesn't need to be, not every performance needs to be an all-time great performance. Thomas Hearns didn't knock every single one of his opponents out in the first or second round. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't need to be like that. Tyson went the distance sometimes too. Like, it is what it is.
He's on the
Great
same.
players to come out on top and still just impressively win it, regardless if it doesn't have to be their most impressive performance.
He's on roughly the same 2 to 3 fight a year schedule as any other top or elite fighter is right now.
Yeah,
But the difference is that generally speaking, he's not taking these like kind of garbage throwaway fights. He's not really building up to anything or like marinating shit. He's going straight at whoever are the top dogs in whatever division he's going into, and he's not wasting much time. Maybe like one fight to acclimate, and then boom. And so I don't know what anybody else really wants from him, apart from just kind of being fans of another fighter and being mad that he's doing stuff your fighter is not doing. I don't know. I don't
sure.
know. But in any case, he's making history. Let's talk about the actual history. So we're talking to, you like that transition?
Yeah, good.
We're talking about unnecessary fights we didn't really want to see happen or didn't need to see happen. I mean, look, man, it's kind of tough, I think, to go back multiple eras or generations on this.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons why, I'll try not to go on too much of a tangent, but one of the reasons why is, starting around a certain time or certain era, fighters simply started fighting much less. So a loss counted for more. Fighters didn't really fight off TV anymore. That wasn't really a thing. And if anybody had to go, when was that? When are you pinpointing that? I'm going to say 70s, mid 70s. We've talked about this on the show before. 1976 Olympics was massive for the popularity of boxing in the U.S. Unfortunately, it also received a massive kick right in the fucking testicles immediately following that with Don King's championship tournament, where ABC pulled itself out of boxing, and then the other networks kind of slowly were like, as sponsors also dropped out. Therefore, TV dates started to become far more premium. Premium cable started picking up boxing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So after that, fighters started fighting far less, and it was like almost like you could take Ray Robinson, Willie Pep, a lot of these fighters with far more fights. They had a lot of unnecessary fights. They had a lot of fights that were like
Oh
total
my God,
fucking
yeah.
scrubs. So it's like almost not fair to bring up some of those eras, in my opinion, which is I'm only just kind of, I guess, making excuses for myself beforehand, saying I stuck to mostly recent shit for that reason.
Makes a lot of sense too. Like, I mean, like if you go back on the records, like you said, it's so vast and all that, especially guys like Pep who had so many fights. And his like incredible runs of like what was it, 80 something wins without a loss and other stuff.
Some
Um,
of them were against dudes just making their debut that like never
yeah,
fought
yeah,
again,
a
or
lot of
I'm like, I don't know who that
yeah.
was.
I mean, like again, it's that type of era. But for the first one I wanted to bring up, here's a question I'll broach to you then really quickly. In all the years of HBO, what do you consider the biggest mismatch that was ever aired on it?
Oh no. I have a feeling you're about to bring up a banger in that regard, but
Hmm.
I mean, there've been some really bad fights, but mismatch? Holy shit, that's a good question. Um Gosh, was that no, that was Showtime. I was about to say Danny Garcia, Rod Salka, but that was Showtime.
Oh no, I was working that fight, man. I was there for that shit too.
Dude, they have
Jesus.
scrubbed that shit from existence on the internet.
Have
I'm
they
telling
really?
you. Yeah, bro, there is, if you put video of that shit up, Showtime will snatch your ass up like a fucking eagle. It's,
Wow. Come to think of it, I've not seen a clip of that in a long time. So you're
they
probably right. But I witnessed that ringside, bro. I witnessed his
I don't
head
know if
get
they're
knocked
embarrassed
off.
about it. I would be, but they pulled
That
that shit
was
super fast.
that was bad, man. Yeah, that was nasty, but no, that was definitely Showtime. So
Yeah, I can't think of any right off the top of my head on HBO because HBO usually did
yeah,
a good job. But I mean, I'm sure that there were a lot of undercard fights, like or co-feature type fights that were just fucking like,
sure, sure, but I'm talking like a high profile one.
oh, well, then it's
Oh,
probably a Roy Jones fight.
there we go. So you know, and to bring it up, this kind of gives you the whole thing. I understand that mandatories are like a thing that's always going to be in boxing. But sometimes, for whatever reason, you get mandatories that are just absolute trash. A lot of the times, actually, not sometimes, a lot of the times. You look at the ratings ever since when it became like a really prominent thing, I would guess, in like the 70s, right? When like, you had like the split WBC and WBA, and then you started seeing the ratings and you started seeing the biases between the ratings and random guys being rated, and all of a sudden, like in the late 70s, early 80s, for instance, the WBA was rating a bunch of dudes from Korea randomly that you
And
never
then they
heard of.
stopped rating their each other's champions and shit like
Yeah,
that, being like
exactly.
little
And then you would get
bitches.
stripped if you wanted to fight each other. WBC had their own biases with certain countries of guys that were getting like fights and all that. It just was, made no sense. But then you realize, okay, it's all about who you know and buyouts and yada, 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 yada. That being said, fast forward a couple of decades and fighters now, especially Roy Jones, were at that point where they had contracts with HBO. And the type of and HBO was the first one to really do this, where they had like exclusive contracts with their fighters. And what that meant was no matter who they fought or whatever they were going to do, they had to air it. You know what I mean? If it had to be some kind of bullshit mandatory, HBO was forced to air it because they had that contract. So there it had to be. So that being said, the fight I'm going to bring up, and this has to be the worst fight I've ever seen as a main event on HBO, is Roy Jones and Ricky Frazier. I mean, this is the most unnecessary mandatory you could ever see in a big fight position because it just shows the ineptitude of the sport sometimes when it comes to that. Rick Frazier was a New York City police officer who had won a Golden Gloves title, I think, once or twice in the area back in the 90s, stuff like that. But the guy was like very advanced age. He was 18-3 as a pro at this time by the time he fought Roy. But and you'd be like, okay, that's not the worst record you can see as, a guy back then or whatever. But like if you look at it and then you see who he was fighting, you're on BoxRec really quick. The biggest names on his record at that point were Anthony Hembrick, who was completely washed at that point by the mid 90s. He was a former Olympian in 88 and a good fighter, but a guy that was kind of um, fragile, I would say, because he had a tendency to get stopped when he stepped up. And by the 90s, he was already a little past it. And I did not see that he fought William Guthrie. Well, see, there you go. The one time he stepped up, he fought William Guthrie and he got poleaxed in 4 rounds. Lost to Eric Lucas and just one of those dudes that you don't really understand how he becomes a mandatory challenger. Like nothing in his record really steps up that makes you say, okay, why is he fighting for a belt here? But not only was he doing it, he was fighting it in a main event on HBO. Roy Jones was looked upon at this point in 1999 as the top pound for pound fighter on the planet. I mean, he had the credentials for that clearly, and it was just one of those. Okay, this is being aired, and even before in the pre-fight, before I think Gil Clancy was one of the announcers that night. I guess George couldn't make it for whatever reason, and Clancy being from New York, and Ricky Frazier being from New York, Clancy was trying his best to spin it to say that, like, okay, Frazier's an awkward guy and maybe he can make it ugly by using his awkwardness. But even then, like, you can tell they were just trying to pull anything out of a fucking hat, right? To try to, like, make this seem like this
Like
isn't just
this
going to be a
ain't
pop.
30 years ago when winning a Golden Gloves, was fucking meant something, Gil. Like,
Yeah, yeah. So it was just like, you just knew it was going to be bad, but I didn't know it was going to end up being that bad.
dude, it was in 2001 that the WBO moved twice, moved somebody who was deceased up in their rankings. And then the WBA did the same shit in 2015.
Yeah.
I mean, back in like 2001, there's a lot of people still using fight facts and shit. So I could envision that stupid ass fight facts, like,
Yeah.
moving fucking snail mail and shit. But in 2015, I don't really see it an excuse for that. Nonetheless, just to demonstrate the stupidity of the sanctioning organizations. And again, not to go out on too much of a tangent, it's just that I think that a lot of people like myself, and
Mhm.
I've followed this for a long time now, decades. I still do not like I get it, but I still don't understand what the sanctioning bodies are doing.
Yeah.
Like I understand that they're ranking, they're sanction I guess sanction. Why the fuck do we need them to sanction anything? Why the fuck do they I don't understand what they're taking money for. Because the whole point of the sanctioning bodies, for them is like, oh, well, like we're nonprofit organizations. Nobody's making money off of this. We're doing this because we love the fighters and we're trying to take care of this shit. That makes
Sure.
no sense. That doesn't make any sense at all. And they're having like, conventions in Cancun and Puerto Vallarta and all sorts of
Yeah, yeah,
crazy
yeah.
wild places and resorts and shit. Like, so anyway, I don't really understand what they're actually like doing. And this is another instance where Roy Jones, Ricky Frazier, dude, Roy Jones went from Ricky Frazier to then Glenn Kelly was another. I think that might have been pay-per-view, but
No,
regardless
Glenn
of
Kelly was regular
was it
HBO.
not?
Yeah, it was
Regardless of whether it
regular.
was or not, that was yet another like mandatory position type of thing where people are like, what? And didn't really know much about Glenn Kelly. He also similarly didn't have very good credentials. And I remember after that, it might have been Mike Katz, but somebody who was kind of like had a biting sarcasm with their writing said something about Roy Jones was fighting the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker because Glenn Kelly was a trash dude in Australia, like he was a sanitation worker, which I'm not, ain't nothing wrong with that. I'm simply saying that it was more that the the idea was that Roy Jones was fighting these dudes who were not full-time fighters. They were
Sure.
fighting, he was fighting the bricklayers and the whatever, with all again respect to bricklayers. Point is that there's a difference between when somebody has the money and the backing and the time to be a full-time fighter and in the gym fucking 6, 8 hours a day rather than working 10 hours a day and then spending like 45 minutes in the gym after work, rushing in before work, et cetera, et cetera. So a problem with that, though, as is that Roy Jones was given one of those exclusive contracts, and he was given similar to kind of like a Don King style contract where they had contractual minimums.
Mhm.
Roy Jones had contractual minimums so that no matter who he fought, he was making, I think it was like $3 million a fight or some shit like that. And other fighters were pissed because other fighters were like, what the fuck? Like I'm having to make six figures for much tougher fights. This guy's over here getting mandatories. So that actually, his contract affected a lot of shit and kind of forced HBO to rubber band the other way where they were still picking up fighters, but they were like, we're not doing that Roy Jones shit anymore. Like we're changing shit up. And it also opened the door for Showtime at the same time to go, hey, we're not putting these fighters under contract. Like we don't do that. We're remember the fights not, or fighters fights not fighters. That was their
That's
motto
right. Mhm.
because they're like we're the anti HBO. We're trying to make good fights. And so in any case, Roy Jones' run against some of those mandatories was a big reason for some of those changes.
I mean, here's the thing, like some of his other fights that he had on HBO, right? Like against, like you mentioned, the aforementioned Glenn Kelly. He was better than Ricky Frazier, all right? Yeah, at least he tried for 6 rounds before Roy did the little hand behind the hand routine and knocked him out.
Yeah, he was
Richard
he was
Hall.
like tough, but he just
He
he
was tough.
was
He wasn't really
slow.
good. Yeah. Yeah, very ponderous. I mean, Richard Hall was another one who was a good fighter and, had a couple of decent wins in his career and was tough as nails against anybody else. I mean, he took an absolute shellac against Roy Jones.
Went
Clinton
to
Woods.
war against Mikolchevsky.
Yeah. Clinton Woods, who would go on to win an IBF title. But it was always weird too, because guys that Roy should have been fighting on regular HBO that had a little bit more of a name as a light heavyweight contender instead of the aforementioned guys would end up being a pay-per-view fight, like, Julio Gonzalez or Eric Harding. You know what I mean? And those should have been regular HBO fights, but instead of those guys having whole five high-profile wins on either HBO, ESPN, Showtime, whatever it might have been, some other network, they ended up getting a shot with Roy. But the back to Frazier really quickly, the fight was so horrible. Like, beforehand, I remember they did the pre-fight thing and Frazier's cop friend, the fellow police officers, I guess, when they were interviewing him, they were literally joking about it and saying, "Oh yeah, I want to, telling Ricky, you want to put our numbers or blah blah blah, something on the bottom of his shoes so he can, give off our publicity for what." One of the guys said that he wanted to put whatever he was working on Frazier's bottom shoes to show off of publicity when he gets dropped. And all of his other friends were like, "Yeah, he doesn't have a fucking chance." And again, it was just one of the most worst fights you could have aired. He was so inept. He was so out of it. He couldn't even look like he should have been there as a sparring partner, let alone challenging for a belt. And it was just horrible. And that was the open time. That was the one time where everybody involved in that broadcast was just like, yo, I apologize for airing this. Lou DiBello was the vice president of HBO at the time. He apologized for it. He said this was absolute garbage. I don't know how Ricky Frazier ended up being, the mandatory challenger for this, and Jose Suleiman should be ashamed of himself. Larry Merchant said on air that night, we presented junk to, and straight up junk, whatever. And I think Jose Suleiman finally even came around and said, I don't know how Frazier became our number one contender, and I feel bad about it, or something stupid. Like, bro, you're the president. What do you mean you don't know how he became number one contender? Clearly, you were involved in him becoming that. So don't try to cover your tracks now because you knew this was absolute trash. But regardless, it was just a fiasco, and it was a bad, bad look for HBO that night.
It's tough to say which like sanctioning organization is the worst or whatever on, and I say that honestly too because they've all done some wild, stupid, crazy shit. But I will say that the WBC is consistently one of the most frustrating because it's considered like the most prestigious or whatever. But before Mauricio, Jose Suleiman before was one of the most non-answer giving motherfuckers on the face of the planet, bro. Like you'd ask him the most straightforward question and he would just not answer it ever. That
Jose?
yeah, Jose Suleiman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he was charming. We've talked about this before, but that fool would just you'd be like, "All right, so how like what are the next ratings going to be?" And he'd go off about like, the beauty of ratings or some shit and you'd be like, "What?
Dude, I told you the one time I met him, like actually got a chance to sit in
Stole your watch."
I mean, luckily I had all my shit, and I was poor back then. I don't think I had anything for them to take, but like that whole charming shit, absolutely. Him and Don King are two dudes, two of the guys I ever met in my life that the minute you meet them, they have you wrapped around their finger easily without you even realizing it because they come off as the most nicest, and you're looking at them like, oh, especially Jose.
That's
Like,
how they got there.
the way he sat there, he puts his arm around you and he has this thing. He's calling you as, compile all this shit and like being really friendly. He's telling you old stories about fighters and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, he's not bad at all, man. This guy's great. I love him. He seemed like he'd be like, your favorite uncle or some shit, but no. And then you quickly get like when you leave and then like, the clarity hits in again and you're just kind of like, wait, no, oh man, that's actually dangerous. Holy fuck, that dude is good. Like,
Like that fool's probably involved in the mob. My
I mean,
bad.
smooth operator right there, bro. Like, it's almost like he would take people like me and just practice that smoothness and that charm just to see how we got. All right, yeah, I got this little twerp. Now I'm gonna use it on someone I actually have to get some work done with. But
Straight up though, bro. Yeah,
yeah,
it's tough to say really who's fucking, the worst here. But that's a really good one and I do have to say they were feuding right around this time too because Bernard Hopkins was obviously he didn't get the recognition that he was supposed to have gotten and he should have gotten throughout the 90s because he was a hard ass worker and he was kind of, working his way through a not very good but still kind of tough middleweight division and cleaning it out basically for these other fighters who showed up at right around kind of the end of his fucking tenure and shit. And I think that he felt like he had been made to go about shit the far harder way than Roy Jones. And then also he held a grudge about the Roy Jones defeating him earlier in their career and stuff like that. And so he was obviously seen as like the anti Roy Jones. Like he was the guy who was, you want Roy Jones, like you want all the glitz and the glamour, and then Roy got the fucking rap contract and all that shit. Like, get Roy Jones then. But if you want somebody who's the fucking workhorse who worked their way to get here and who's gonna fucking tell you how it is, and I'm never gonna do that type of shit type of guy, you get Bernard Hopkins. That was how he kind of painted himself too. course, we would come to find out later that he was bamboozling everybody just the same way he said Roy was bamboozling people too. But at the time, he obviously had worked harder and had to come up a different way or whatever. But when he did finally get his recognition against Felix Trinidad, a lot of people forget Felix Trinidad. The whole supposition, the entire fucking assumption was that Felix Trinidad was going to go right through that middleweight tournament, including Bernard Hopkins, and straight to Roy Jones. And there was the whole feature in the ring where they were like Tito versus Roy Jones and all this type of shit. That shit was
AO
set up.
magazine, every magazine was going through it back then.
Bro, Don King wanted it. That was the money fight. The Puerto Ricans were way behind Tito. Roy Jones was kind of at the peak of his pound for pound, or at least perhaps not the peak, but definitely had been there for a bit and was the guy to knock off or whatever. And so a lot of people forget that that was the thing. I don't know if this was true, but Hopkins said that after the Trinidad fight, when they went to give him the Ray Robinson trophy, that it had Felix Trinidad's name on it. That's what Hopkins said. I don't know if that's true. But anyway, the whole point is that when Hopkins finally got that recognition, a lot of shit switched. He was like, fine, we'll do the Felix Trinidad rematch, switch the terms.
Yeah.
Tito got like 80 something percent for the fight. I'm gonna get 80% for the rematch then. And Don King was like, you're fucking nuts. Because he was, like from a financial standpoint, that doesn't make any sense. Regardless of if you won. Like, you're the star's the star. But regardless, hey man, he held out. He turned down a fucking Showtime offer that ended with him facing Calzaghe, blah, blah, blah. But then in the meanwhile, he wound up facing a not very, I don't know, it was necessarily that he was awful per se, but he was just so devoid of entertainment. His mandatory Murad Hakkar was a dude who I can't remember what ethnicity he was, but I know he fought out of France. I want to say he's Moroccan. And in any case, he fought out of France, and the dude was like doing everything he possibly could. It was a fiasco. He's everything he possibly could to avoid a fight. I believe that was also on HBO, so that would be kind of in the running as well.
It was. It
Like
was.
Hopkins was not a seek and destroy type of fighter anymore. He was more of a technician. He wasn't the like kind of mid 90s dude that he used to be. He was like running Hakar down, finally knocked him down. It was a fiasco. And then Larry Merchant attacks him in the post fight interview. Oh man, that was not good. So Hopkins Hakar is gonna be that was a long setup, but that's another entry on this list.
It's a really good one, man, because people forget Hopkins' whole early when in his title reign, before he got the HBO recognition, after stopping Trinidad, he didn't really have a home, in terms of like his fights were televised, but like you didn't really
That's
have, he
true.
had like a really a steady base of where he
Went
had,
through a bunch of promoters too.
yeah, absolutely. So like early on, his first title fight was against Segundo Mercado, when he won the title, I mean, was televised by Showtime. But then his first title fight, his first title defense was on what was it, like Fox or something? When he knocked out that guy Steve
He fought
Frank.
on Fox a handful of times. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So he knocks him
I think
out. And
USA
then
too.
Joe Lipsy was on like I think ABC or something because it was like the free preview to buy I want to say Tyson Bruno that night or one of those Tyson pay-per-views or something. And then yeah, a few of his fights were on Showtime, like against John David Jackson, the first Robert Allen fight, obviously. And if you watch that first fight, they were almost trying to build Allen as to be the guy to succeed against Hopkins because Allen had a lot of momentum coming into that fight. And there was a little bit of bad blood. And then after what happened in that first fight with Mills Lane chucking Hopkins out of the ring, it got clipped. And they had the rematch, but like there was also Bo James, there was a then undefeated but really untested Glenn Johnson, like just a lot of like unremarkable, names on his ledger. Not bad names. I mean, more or less kind of solid, but not anything that's going to make you stand out, especially in that type of era of the middleweight division that was so just blah in the mid 90s.
Yeah,
So,
he missed a better era before
yeah,
him, unfortunately. And I mean, some people might say, well, that's why he's so successful. I don't know. I mean, he had the kind of skills that would have probably been fine in just about any era. But yeah, his era wasn't
but
spectacular.
I will say before Trinidad, a guy that did ended up helping him out, at least in terms of like popularity and I mean, and like more high profile for his fights would be Antoine Eccles because Eccles, when he came, when he first came back on the scene in the mid
Bernard's
90s,
faking it.
that's one of my all-time favorite moments. One of my all-time favorite moments. Rest in peace, Antoine Eccles. That's one of my all-time favorites. But like when he came, when he first came on the scene, he was knocking out Brian Barboza and he was beating others. And when he first got matched with Hopkins, I think that was on Fox Sports of all channels. And that was a fight that a lot of people were excited about. And Hopkins, came through a couple of rough patches, but he won it comprehensively. But when they had that rematch, and when Eccles grabs him and just body slams the shit out of Hopkins on the ground, and Hopkins legitimately lands on his shoulder. Hopkins has been known to, take flops and all that, right? But this one looked like he definitely was hurt. It was a bad drop. And then the first thing Eccles does was goes walking over, storming over to the first camera that he sees, takes out his mouthpiece. Bernard's faking. Bernard's wild. Blah, blah, blah. I was just, and I was watching it with my best friend, and he and I both just start cracking the fuck up because who doesn't love a good heel? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and he had a very like a villain like face too, and the fool just walked up and he called it. I mean, I'm not gonna say he was faking that time. I don't think he was. I think he really did separate his shoulder, but he did call it that Bernard was a faker later. That fool was the biggest
He
faker.
was like, Bernard's faking, Bernard's not hurt, but no, and then they cut away from him immediately. Like, we can't be having this guy just talk shit on the camera.
Jesus. I better watch it too, because that fool will like confront me the next time I'm at a fight, which would be never, but still.
I ask you to go to the bathroom, bro.
Fuck me, fight. That is the weirdest. I've never, ever, and I'm not saying I come from the hood. I don't,
Yeah.
but I've never even heard of somebody going like, come to me. That's like a joke from a sitcom about women going to the bathroom to get. That's what are you talking about, Bernard? I don't understand that. All right, this is not the Bernard Hopkins hate show, but nonetheless, weird, bro. Also,
Well,
check Oscar, bro. What the fuck are you doing, Bernard? Go worry about your boy. Stop talking about bathrooms. Anyway, this Murad Hakar business, bro. Yeah, going into the Trinidad fight, a lot of people forget the kind of setup about that, dude. There was a lot of hype with Felix Trinidad that really overshadowed the shit that was going on with Bernard Hopkins going into that shit. So I mean, I'm not saying that Bernard Hopkins, especially with the Hakar fight, like that wasn't his fault. It wasn't him making Hakar the fucking mandatory. But similarly, he exploited his own HBO contract rather
all
than rematching Trinidad or doing something else. He basically said, like, all right, well, I'm doing the same thing Roy Jones is doing. And that's pretty much what he said during the post fight interview, more or less.
and then when the Trinidad fight rematch fell apart because Trinidad suddenly retired after stopping Hassan Sharifi, Bernard focused his attention on a rematch with Roy Jones after that. And remember, they had a couple of like double headers where they were like co-headline, and same thing. Hopkins did the same shit. It wasn't like he fought a guy a little bit better than Hakar, but I mean, Carl Daniels was his mandatory challenger, but Daniels was way past it, didn't have a shot in hell, and it was just kind of an easy beatdown that Hopkins that was not exciting at all to watch. You know what I mean? So like, there were other
Yeah.
there were other HBO airings of Hopkins that you still just been like, eh.
Yeah, unfortunately. And I mean, like, he became more of a businessman, dude. And again, I don't really blame him. It was just he became more of a businessman about the way that he handled his career. And he's obviously got a lot of his faculties and he's made a lot of money, but he did start kind of exploiting it and milking it the same way that Roy Jones did in that regard. So he,
Sure.
he wound up kind of becoming the thing that he preached against for a long time.
1,000%. That's a good one. So the next one I wanted to bring up, it wasn't so much a fight because I guess you'd have to call it an exhibition, but it was an absolute fucking fiasco. And considering almost 50 years now since it's happened, when people still bring it up, people still just kind of like, laugh about it or just like if you were around during that time, shake their head. And that's Foreman in the Toronto Five.
Okay, I thought you were going to say something else from right around the same year, but yeah, dude, that's actually a really good one. And I mean, it's a really good one to rewatch because it's fucking hilarious. Like
It really is.
Ali just heckling the entire time. Oh man, George Foreman's a fun person to talk about, a fun fighter to talk about, especially because he had like separate careers
Sure.
and is such a big personality and people know him and shit like that. But yeah, dude, that was he was such a lot of shit condensed into a very short period of time during his first career. You know, his rise to the top, and looking like a monster before he took the title against Joe Frazier, and then looking like a monster as he took the title and making his first few defenses. But then his fall against Ali, and basically the really embarrassing, well, not 100%, but a lot of it really embarrassing and just kind of slam bang shit that he had going on after Ali. Ron Lyle, you know, Jimmy Young, and trying to kind of reinvent himself or whatever, doing with Don King this exhibition or whatever. There had been a number of tournaments. I remember in the 19, well, obviously I don't remember, but remember researching in the 1930s where they would have multiple fights in one evening for one fighter. And if you look on some records, you'll see them. Like, for instance, probably the best known fighter who participated was Tony Galento. There was a tournament called the Beef Trust Tournament where he fought, I think it was three different fighters in one night. And that happened a handful of times, not with him, but with other fighters. And so obviously it's not something that happened a lot. You know, like fighting multiple opponents in a day is not
Mhm.
something that you see very often unless it's some weird MMA tournament that, you know, Pride FC or some shit. Fucking awesome. Bushido. Nonetheless, yeah. So I mean, this entire idea of putting Foreman in with the five was kind of like a call back to those kind of weird novelty acts.
1,000%. And the way it went down too was that like Foreman, after losing Zaire, was he was fragile minded at that point, like clearly. It came up again after he lost to Jimmy Young. But like Foreman, he was invincible before the Ali fight, clearly. Like no one had seen anything like that. He even looked more scarier than Sonny Liston because he was bigger than Liston, and just the way what he did to Joe Frazier, what he did to Ken Norton, what he did to anyone else that he fought at for that matter. He just bludgeoned them. Even the dudes that had no business being in the ring with him, like Joe King Roman. Poor guy, just, like a gnat getting hit on a windshield. It was awful to watch. And and Foreman was so cold too, the way he did it. You know what I mean? Just like storming around and just pissed off and surly, and his backstory, and just so cold and calm. But all those attributes, and then he gets in there with Ali. He's a massive favorite, and people were like so scared for Ali that they were scared for his health. You know what I mean? Like before the fight, when people were wondering if Ali was like going to get secretly hurt, there was rumors that like Freddie Pacheco had a plane ready for Ali to be chartered on to get flown out for treatment if something bad happens to him. There was another person. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not, but like, boxing lore. And then I heard another person read somewhere that they said Archie Moore had said that night that he smelled death in the air or something. Like, you know,
Imagine it's, first of all, it's George Foreman, who,
yeah,
like you said, scary. It's like Sonny Liston was leveling motherfuckers, but George Foreman was doing it in a way more like dramatic way because he's like swinging fucking,
sure.
you know. Sonny Liston was a little more like straight up and shit, but you got George Foreman is scary enough, and then you got Archie Moore and Sandy Sadler watching your ass from the corner, just like,
Yeah.
are you fucking shitting me, dude? I would like that dude a couple years ago who just straight up left the ring before the fight
Yeah.
started. That's what I'd do. I'd be like, all right, I'm out of here. Bye. Do I
1,000%.
still get paid? Bye.
I would already run away without even seeing George Foreman if I saw Archie Moore and Sandy Sadler staring across from me, smiling over there. Especially Sadler, probably licking his chops because the dude was like, close enough to being a what would you call him? Uh, those people that have no feeling. What is that?
Psychopath.
No, that's yeah, basically like a psycho. I mean, like he, the word will come to me in a second. I don't know why I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but like he was, Sandy Sadler was just a scary individual. So was Archie Moore and George Foreman. The thing that made him so scary too was that like the two guys that gave Ali the most trouble, Joe Frazier and Ken Norton. I, within 4 rounds, Foreman swatted them both and just made them look like they were just absolute nothings. You know what I mean? Like it was bad. The way he just paintbrushed them, did whatever the fuck he wanted with them. And so getting back to the Ali thing, for him to lose the way he did, he punched himself out, he lost everything, got exhausted. Ali kind of did play him for a dope, took his best shots, kept on talking shit to him out throughout the entire fight, getting into his head while it happened, and then the conclusive knockout, how he finished it. That would really put a damper on anybody's type of mental being after that, especially a guy like Foreman, who I won that before that fight. He thought that he was the baddest man on the planet, and rightfully so. There was not a person on that world that could have touched him, and he knew it. And then for that all to come crashing down emphatically the way he did, he got counted out. He got up. He looked so bewildered. He stumbled out of the ring. Like, it was a very dramatic way. The way he gets like goes like that, then he goes down, immediately gets up, just walks over to Archie Moore with his head down, and just kind of walks out of the ring. You know what I mean? Disappears completely out of sorts. And so, yeah. But when he comes back, his first thought of business is that, like, everybody thinks I can't fight. Everybody thinks I'm weak. I'm this, I'm that, blah, 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 blah. What's a better way for me to show that I'm still king of the world? Oh, I can fight 5 guys in one night.
If you're already caught on a hot microphone saying, "I'll prove them," you've already lost.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're already showing that you're worried about proving it to everybody. It's like you already showed they got to you. You lost. You're
Yeah.
done. But I mean, obviously he pulled himself together, but I'm talking about like for that during that stage of his career, there was no winning. He was so mentally in a weird place. So the Foreman fights 5 in Toronto, it's like I said, dude, it's hilarious because you get George Foreman in there, and the entire time it's Muhammad Ali's like the guest commentator. And
And
so
Howard
Muhammad
Cooks.
Ali's not only ringside and he's commentating, but he's heckling George Foreman from where he's sitting and like yelling at George Foreman while he's commentating. George Foreman can obviously hear him. It's not an event that's super well attended compared to like a big fight because a lot of people knew it was like a circus event. Don King behind it. People already knew by this time Don King was a little bit of a huckster and shit. Like the people know. And so in any case, you get Foreman and he's like half of the time, trying to beat the shit out of the sparring partner. And there was like several opponent changes
Yes.
during the promotion. There was supposed to be a bunch of different fighters who were going to be participating, and like they all dropped out and got replaced by completely different fighters, one of whom George had already fought and knocked out several years earlier. I mean, it's like it was a bad lineup of fighters in that regard. And so he's like struggling against these guys that he probably should have, whose asses he probably should have been kicking. And the entire time also looking ringside to Ali, like, what do you think? What do you think, buddy? Am I doing an all right job? And then like between fights, like going over and staring at Ali like it's doing something. Ali's like
Yeah.
laughing in his face, like, look at you. Like fucking look at how badly I affected your ass, you idiot. Like
Ali would also
it's kind of
too.
sad, but it's funny.
Ali also too. He would, like, whenever there was a fight going on, he would yell at the opponents. He go, "Lay on the ropes, lay on the ropes. He'll get tired."
Yeah, you're tired him out. He's getting tired. And he really was. That's the funny thing is
You
that
guys
by
get
fight
tired.
3, George is like,
Lay on the ropes. You see Foreman, and then the Cosell is just like, this is a fucking circus, but he's trying his best to, like, make some sort of like
yeah, he's trying to
sense.
kind of call it straight. And he's just like, here's what's happening in the ring. But Ali's like just going nuts next to him and shit.
It's,
It's
I mean, look,
hilarious.
it's absolute fiasco. Who the hell knows how it would be taken today in the
I
world of
wish
social
they did more
media?
shit like that, to be
Yeah,
honest.
because I can't recall if it's real. I mean, sure, there's been exhibitions where the guys who do something like that, more or less what this was, except Foreman was actually going out there trying to take their heads off. But like, there's exhibitions, like for instance, Larry Holmes did a number of them with like former contenders that he would do like in the late 80s and early 90s, and other fighters for that matter. But for it to be like the way this was like that, this was like kind of like its own unique thing, kind of a throwback to the Sullivan days, if you want to put it that way. You know what I mean? Before like boxing got like really uniform, and you're walking down the baddest son of
A
a bitch.
barnstorming type of shit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Him drunkenly hoofing around wherever he was trying to.
Yeah,
Not the
like I
volume.
mean, what would have happened had Foreman like officially had Foreman gotten laid out or something like that? Like it doesn't count
You
against his
know,
record. Nothing
I'll
happens.
say this. Listen, a couple of the opponents that were initially supposed to be in it were much more legit than some of the guys. All right, like Boone Kirkman was probably the best guy out of that lot that fought that day. Kirkman was a contender back in the day and was generally a good fighter. He was a notch below, the top guys of that era, but he was generally a good fighter, and I believe he went the distance with Foreman out of
Yeah,
that group. Um, but Mac Foster was initially supposed to be one of the guys that was supposed to be a part of the Toronto Five.
and that could have been that could have been a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt Foster by that time was definitely washed. I think, he lost to Jerry Corey, in the early 70s. So by the time he got into, by the time he would have got in with Foreman, he would have been past it, but he could still punch like a monster. And I'm
Exactly.
sure
Yeah.
that like they realized, you know what, maybe he's not a guy that we need to have on there. And Pedro Augusto was another one that was supposed to be another name, but
They
ended up
basically got
being,
like dudes who used to be light heavyweights and were half
yeah,
retired.
like Terry Daniels, who had fought Frazier for the heavyweight championship. Um, And by that time, had eroded completely into absolute nothing. I think Alonzo Johnson was another one, Jerry Judge, guys like that. I'm just, yeah.
Yeah, dude. It was a definitely a fiasco, but a funny one. And but also I think that it clearly, as we've probably indicated, it did the exact opposite of what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to give Foreman confidence, make him look good, make it look like he could still fight, that Ali didn't affect him that much. It did the exact opposite. It made him
Nothing.
look insecure as fuck. It made him look exhausted 2 fights in. It made him look like he didn't know what to do with these sparring partner level fighters. It made him look bad, and it made Ali look hilarious, and that was like the I wouldn't say it was the height necessarily because Ali kind of had a couple of like crests of popularity, but that was definitely a crest of Ali's popularity after regaining the title, knocking Foreman out, and then kind of going on a dumb world tour, but nonetheless he was popular and
Yeah,
fucking his name was on everything.
absolutely. And, Foreman, that fight never came, the fruition to that rematch never came. Unfortunately, like a lot of people wanted it. It looked like it was on the trajectory of potentially happening, but when Foreman lost to Jimmy Young, well, I mean, there went that. And, there's no need to talk about Foreman's other career. Hell, we can bring up a couple of fights if you want to about unnecessary fights with his shit. Let's look at half the dudes fighting on the way back on his comeback. Or even the ones that like, kind of using his HBO contract to a degree when he fought a guy like Jimmy Ellis, in his first fight after Holyfield. But like that I had to bring
or
up the Toronto Five. I
or
mean, that's not.
later on after he was champion even.
Oh God, Jesus Christ, yeah. But those
Yeah,
fights were
that's going down into a hole.
yeah, yeah. But the Toronto Five is not something I think I don't even know if we really brought up on the show before, but it's not a part of
Not
Foreman's
sure.
career that he ever talks about because obviously it's not something he wants to. And it's not something I've seen a lot of merch from either. I'm sure there have been shirts and stuff like that made of it, but I've never seen anything surface.
I believe I've seen, I want to say a program, but I'm not
Yeah,
positive. But like not like for sale, but just like a photo of one or something. You know
sure.
what I mean? But like that being said, there's a lot to say also for exhibitions in other eras because I mean, not that I like love them or something like that, but they're really interesting to me because they're obviously not counted the same way as official fights. And so
Oh,
I've mentioned this before on the show, but exhibitions generally are not shown on the records on BoxRec. And this is not a slight to BoxRec at all because there have been a lot of people bitching about BoxRec. And I will again reiterate, I'm a BoxRec Plus user and enthusiastically I have no major issue with whatever they're doing with any sanctioning organization and don't really care. My main point about this, though, is they don't really count exhibitions, which is fine. And Cyber Boxing Zone, at least for fighters from other eras, big fighters anyway, do log exhibitions. And so you can go there and look at exhibitions for a bunch of fighters. And so for that reason, I think that it's really interesting. Like fighters like Foreman, for instance, that might be one of the reasons why the exhibitions in Toronto aren't talked about quite as much because they're not on his official boxing record and not
good
as many
call.
people, remember them. And so that being said, I guess my next entry will make it a quick one because one, we have spoken about it on the show. It's around the same time and involves a lot of the same characters that we just spoke about. So again, we don't have to go into detail, but Ali Inoki, and I know it's not an official fight, but similarly, it had a lot of the same elements. It also similarly backfired against Ali right around this time, as he was doing kind of his world tour and at the height of this crest of popularity or whatever. Just completely knocked him off course physically.
Dude, it was such a stupid event too, man. Like Antonio Inoki, me being a wrestling fan, I can respect him for New Japan and like his matches too. He was a great wrestler and like he brought a lot of notoriety to the sport and yabba 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 whatever. But he had this idea of him that he need to be like the supreme fighting machine of everybody and always wanted to challenge
Sound
different
like a
youth.
little bit of a dickhead.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
I
like
mean, just about anybody who gets to that
yeah,
level
and
of anything
and a
is,
dude
but
who had an inflated ego of himself and how much of a badass he was. And so that being said, like he would always try to do these fights where he would challenge other people to like mixed fights and stuff like that. Most notably, besides Ali, he challenged Idi Amin to a fight. The Ugandan dictator. Shows you that shows you that Noki had like he didn't really give a fuck who he hung with. He hung with him. He hung with Saddam Hussein, all these others, but that's another story in itself. When he was getting with Ali, there was like already rules in place beforehand. I think that like Ali couldn't be slammed. Inoki, what was it? You couldn't like go above the waist or something like that for attacks.
yeah, like there was, I'd have to look at him, but there was like a completely different set of rules that would have basically made it a, worthless contest, which was kind of the point because they
Right.
didn't want them taking a bunch of damage. There was going to be no kicks above the waist, like no, like, head kicks or whatever. Um, yeah. So, I mean, basically like a mixed martial arts fight where nothing real, like nothing, real injurious happens.
Initially, it was supposed to be like I think they had it all planned. I mean, I haven't read it into it in a long time, but it was supposed to be like kind of worked, and then it
Yeah.
became a shoot. Yeah.
Supposedly it was going to be a work, and something about it Ali didn't like last minute and said that he wasn't going to go through with. I don't remember what it was, but whatever it was they had planned, he didn't like something, some element of it. And so he decided he didn't want to do it and he wasn't going to go through with it. And so because of that, and because I guess, um, if you're viewing it from a kind of a wrestling standpoint, Inoki viewed that as kind of like a last minute double cross. And so instead of going like, all right, well, let's work through this and let's figure out a way to make this work, like, I mean, perhaps a more charitable wrestler might have. I mean, I don't know who. Perhaps somebody else might have been like, let's fucking try to make this fun or some shit. He was not that guy. And instead he went, I'm going to kick the fuck out of Muhammad Ali's legs for 45 minutes.
That's what he did. And it was nasty. I mean, listen, if you've never seen it, don't go back and watch it because it's some of the most tedious, awful shit to ever see. It's not even
Unless
worth
you just want to watch Ali talk shit and get the
it.
fucking shit kicked out of his legs,
While he
it's
runs
not
around
worth watching.
15 rounds, and Inoki literally just stays on his back doing the crab thing, crab walking, trying to kick at his legs.
Every
And
boxing fan gets furious.
yeah. Dude, he ruined Ali at that point. Ali was never the same. I mean, not to say that Ali was the dancing master of old, but his legs were never the same because he suffered such damage to it. He got blood clots in his legs from it. There's photos of him and his legs all wrapped up after that fight and stuff. That was just a stupid, stupid idea and a fiasco. And
Yeah.
just unnecessary. If there's going to be one unnecessary fight, regardless of what we want to call it, it was that one because that did exasperate, the decline of Ali already as it was. He started laying on the ropes more after more fights, taking more punishment and everything. It's just his career just like went down.
Anybody who watches either kickboxing, Muay Thai, or mixed martial arts knows that, like, like a full on, like a leg kick, a
Mhm.
kick to the thigh, for instance, it's like, I'm about to search this up as I'm talking, but just a full on leg kick to the thigh in mixed martial arts, it's like it doesn't really take too many of those. It
Right.
takes like, a few, literally a half dozen, maybe, if there's strong leg kicks, to where you see the other fighters start walking funny, not using that leg, switching stances, getting redness on the legs and going, fuck. Or now, since it's 2024 and mixed martial arts has developed, they know you check leg kicks. You don't just and like step into the leg kick because then you're taking the fucking force of the leg kick, you lift your leg up so that your leg goes flying and you're not taking the full force. That's, you check the leg kick. In 1976, Ali didn't know that shit. He was not well versed in the idea that you don't just take the leg kick. So my point is that in mixed martial arts, whatever this point is, half a dozen kicks and their leg is fucked in 2024. Ali took 107 fucking leg kicks, bro.
Jesus Christ, that's
107. If you fucking Are you kidding me, bro? If you said that somebody took 107 leg kicks in a UFC fight, they'd be dead.
yeah,
They'd
100%.
be dead.
And he's using it like Inoki was wearing heavy ass boots when he was kicking Ali. Like it's
Yeah,
just
that's another thing is that he was also wearing those big ass fucking superhero wrestling boots. Fuck.
like thinking back on it just pisses me off. I
Shit.
don't know. It's an awful time.
Hit my
But
shin on the fucking bed and I'm done for a week. Kidding
are
me?
you kidding me? Yeah, we talked about that, bro. You just I don't care how strong you are, man. You stub your pinky toe, your ass is going down, you ain't getting up. You know what I mean? But um
Jesus.
it was, I think the undercard too, but this wasn't held in Japan. But it was, on
Shea
closed circuit.
Stadium, yeah.
Shea Stadium. You had Andre the Giant, Chuck Wepner. That was,
That's way
that
more
was
fun to
actually
watch.
entertaining. Yeah, that's a lot of fun to watch. You know what I mean? Because that one actually, again, falls into more or less a shoot near the end of it. And it
At
wasn't
least
supposed to.
elements of it, for
Yeah,
sure.
1,000%. During the match, Wepner is there fighting for his life, and Andre's just kind of, doing big man stuff, mauling him around and whatever, right? But then at one point, I forgot how I don't remember exactly when it fell apart, but at one point that someone said that Andre looked at his either Gorilla Monsoon or Arnold Skull and someone ringside and went shoot like it's time. It's like there's gonna be a shoot now. And he just turned and went to Wepner and just grabbed him. And Wepner was still trying to swing. And yeah, I think Al Braverman or someone was over there in the corner screaming. And you see him just pick him up and just fling him over the top rope. And Wepner is still trying to fight and everything like that.
Yeah.
He's
So he gets hung up in the ropes and like falls down and takes even a worse bump than he would have. And he just fucking, yeah, dude. If you
Andre was
watch
like,
it,
yeah,
I'm not an expert on it on the match, but if you watch it back, to me it looked like Andre keeps trying to get him in close. Like it looked like they were planning some sort of throw out of the ring or something like that. And Andre keeps trying to get him close, and Wepner keeps rabbit punching him, but
that
hard.
was it.
And
Yes.
he's like, bam. And you could see Andre kind of getting like annoyed, like he's looking like to the side, like, the fuck, dude. And then he hits him with one, and Andre just kind of goes like, all right, like a
Yeah.
really frustrated parent or something, and just fucking grabs him up and starts trying to pick him up. But Wepner's like not a small guy. And on top of that, he's rabbit punching the shit out of him. So that's what looks like real. Whereas like he pisses him off and he starts picking him up, and Wepner's still trying to rabbit punch him. But yeah, ends disastrously, and it's almost like nobody knows what's happening. Everybody's like, "Wait, what? So is it over? Is it? Are we? What happening?" That shit's way more entertaining to watch, though, for sure. Because Ali just getting kicked for 45 minutes it's a rough watch, dude.
Also, too, if you have Peacock and the WWE network is on that, there are clips of Ali getting ready before his building up to that match because he was featured a lot on WWF television. And at one point, one of them is really funny. He gets in the ring with Gorilla Monsoon for whatever. Monsoon had a match, and Ali was playing the heel, obviously, right? And Ali
Yeah,
gets in the ring, starts talking a lot of shit, and starts running his mouth at him. And then Monsoon is there, like pointing back at him, and Ali flicks a couple of jabs, and Monsoon just picks him up like a nothing, and puts him on his back and gives him an airplane spin, like spins him around
yeah,
over and
yeah,
over,
yeah.
places Ali down. Ali pretends, I'm sure he was a little dizzy, but Ali definitely plays it off like, oh God, I can't. Falls
That was
over.
back in the 70s when that shit was still like people still believed that. Like, oh, he's spinning him, like you thought that
Yeah.
was doing damage.
And then Gorilla Monsoon was like, hey, nothing. I'm already champion. I picked him up and flinged him. And um, I mean, and then Floyd Mayweather, a couple of decades later, a few decades later, when he comes over in the mid 2000s. And he had that match with, I mean, I'm not going to lie, that match with him and Big Show was absolutely fucking hysterical. I can watch that over and over and find that amazing. Floyd did really good in there. Not to veer, of course, too much, but like the way he got slapped around, so much smaller than Big Show, like he
He
really,
actually sold it pretty well.
He did great, and not only that too, like he played the dickhead character perfection. I mean, obviously that's him in general, but like his the guys that he had as his bodyguards, I know one of them looked like he had trained to be a wrestler or something. It had to be because like he took some bumps from Big Show that was great. Like Ellaby got up there, you can't do that, you can't do that. And then like one of the bodyguards gets up and Show grabs the guy, and you see the guy like shaking and all that. And Show rips his shirt and then chops him twice, and the dude I wonder if that was actually Floyd's guy or that was a plant because the dude sold that perfectly. He was like, "Oh my god!" and then just drops. You know what I mean? And then you see them all trying to run away, and I don't know. It was good. It was really good. But that
Well, and
was
a lot of people, and especially a lot of boxing people, because I get it. You know what I mean? Like like if you're a fan of a particular combat sport, like that's your shit, that's your baby. And if somebody's trying to credit some other shit, they get mad. And so if you're a boxing fan, you're just like, you just Floyd, he was taking some vacation in the wrestling. Nobody fucking gave a shit. Not true. That was instrumental in making him a bigger star with that crossover shit and Dancing with the Stars. 100%. And you can't fucking, mention Floyd's rise to the fucking top without that shit, without question.
so. Another one comes from one of my favorite rivalries of the '90s, but probably should have ended after their second fight because why would you need to do it after so many years later except that you just wanted to try to right or wrong because you still feel salty about it or feel bad. And so I have to bring up Jeff Fennick, Azuma Nelson 3.
God, and what a can of worms, dude. Because now it's like if I post some shit about Fennec and I'm just like, yeah, he's an X division champion, people are like, the WBC gave him another one. And I'm like, I don't do, I
Yeah.
don't honor that. What? I don't recognize. Get out of here, bro. Come on.
So yeah, exactly. It's a big can of worms, this whole fight and the whole thing that went about it. All right. Fennec at that point, what was he? He was yeah, I think he was already a three division champion by the time he challenged Nelson, correct? Because
At
Junior ran
least
away.
two. Yeah, because he went 122, 126, and 130, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yep,
I
122,
believe.
126, 130, yeah. And so as I remember so the before his first fight with Nelson, all right, Nelson had already been a long established champion from the first Salvador Sanchez fight all the way up until then. His only loss had been to Pernell Whitaker. And he was very competitive in the Whitaker fight. You know what I mean? He was already recognized not only as one of the best pound for pound on the planet, but just one of those guys that when you call him the professor, it just worked for him. Like I mean, he wasn't old at this point. Maybe, maybe slightly getting a little, past it, but just like he had that dignified air that rare champions can only get. Fennec, on the other hand, was a three division titleist who was one of the most exciting fighters of the 80s. I mean, a brilliant pressure fighter who just swallowed you like as whole and strong as fuck and really exciting to watch. But he had the most brittle hands on the planet, so it really kind of like stunted his like, popularity. Whenever he was like it looked like he was about to become mainstream, he would have to take major time off because his hands were so fucked up. And he initially retired actually before the first Nelson fight. I think he beat like Marcos Villasnal or something like that to retain his belt for the final time. And then after he did it, he retired for initially because his hands were so bad. But then when he was able to recover and joining up with Don King to co-promote the fight, they ended up fighting on the undercard, I want to say, of Tyson Ruddock 1, I think it was maybe or two. But the second fight, I think it was Tyson Ruddock 2. But that
Yeah.
that fight in itself, that would easily today that would be its own pay-per-view event, or if not a pay-per-view event, like main event on a premium network type fight, right? Huge. Definitely, I mean, to show you how it was back then, that was like the main undercard attraction. Anyways, Fennec, puts on the performance of his career. His hands hold up. He generally gets the better of Nelson. I mean, Nelson, is competitive in spots, especially early on, but gradually Fennec takes control and just does what he does. He grinds you down, beats you up, and Nelson spent long portions of the fight on the ropes just taking punishment. And in round 12, he looked like he was about to get knocked out. Fennec was beating him from pillar to post. So at the end of the fight, it looked by everybody that like Fennec was a clear winner. Ferdy Pacheco and Steve Albert thought that Fennec was a go away winner. Everybody in the audience felt that. I mean, it was just the way the fight went, and somehow the fight ends up being a draw. And it was like, wait, I mean, it was bad too. Crowd is going crazy, booing. I remember Don King. The first thing Fennec is pissed off. You could just see it. You feel bad for him, bro. Like he put in the fight of his life, overcame his bad hands and all this other shit he had to do, and he beats the hell out of one of the best fighters on the planet, and he gets jobbed of that. And Don King walks by him. He's like, "We're gonna do a rematch in Australia." And Fennec goes, "Oh, fuck off!" As he walked by because he was pissed, you know. And rightfully so, right? It was bad. Like, Nelson blamed it on a case of malaria, saying that was his performance, but he also thought he won the fight because Nelson was a guy that never ever like thought he ever lost. Like anytime you ever ask, nah, blah, 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 whatever. He's a proud guy. But generally it looked like Fennec won that fight. So when the rematch was going to be set to happen in Australia, again, everybody just kind of assumed this was going to be, the right would have been wronged, right? But unfortunately, Nelson was one of those guys that one of those rare fighters like Sugar Ray Robinson, notably, and others, who if you give them a hard time in their first fight, they're gonna learn from that and they're gonna come back in a rematch and usually beat the shit out of you. You know what I mean? And I don't know if Fennec had outside the ring distractions before that second fight or whatever was going on, but Nelson just routed him.
I don't remember what he had said because I remember there's an interview about it in Zuma Nelson's book, but yeah, pretty much it goes like how you said. He doesn't really think that he ever actually lost a fight. Everything was preordained by God, and that kind of stuff. Which is not surprising. Any top level athlete, you got to expect some eccentricity from them or some kind of weird mindset because they don't get there without having a weird mindset in the first place. But regardless, yeah, dude, it really seemed like Jeff Fennick was a good foil for Azuma Nelson. Azuma Nelson, very, very good counter puncher, dangerous puncher that you had to really watch out for. Couldn't sleep on him. Catch you with a stinging counter that you didn't really see coming, and then hurt the shit out of you, finish you off. That was kind of the type of fighter he was. Not an overwhelming guy, but you couldn't sleep, dude, because his counters were deadly. But then Jeff Fennick was more of a swarmer, more of a kind of push you up against the ropes and work you over type of guy who, like you said, would have had much better power and would have been a better fighter if it weren't for really bad hand issues throughout his career. But it seemed like that style, nonetheless, was going to kind of overwhelm Azuma Nelson and probably would in the rematch too, because it seemed like Azuma Nelson hadn't fought in the meanwhile and was like, all right, well, it's just a bad style for him. We'll see where it goes this time because often rematches tend to be a more amplified version of that first fight. You get the
Yeah.
same result, but just worse. And so it's kind of logical to think that that's how it was going to go. Not against Azuma Nelson, dude. He was not that kind of fighter. Very smart fighter, and the kind of fighter that again you just couldn't fall asleep at the wheel against Zuma Nelson, and he beat the crap out of Jeff Fennick against his own hometown, or well, not hometown in Melbourne, not too far away, but in any case, at home.
Yeah, that was a big event. Like, I remember reading in the Ring magazine doing when they were doing the write up afterwards after the fight. Um, and they're talking about how, that was everybody was just expecting Fennec to win that one. That was like a big coronation night. Like they had luminaries in the crowd. I think Johnny Femichin, who they said had just overcome like a nasty car accident or something. He was in a wheelchair ringside. He was making one of his first appearances, in public again after that, and everyone was excited. Like it was just a big event that was supposed to be there for a celebration for Fennec righting his wrong. And round one, Nelson comes out there very stoically with his hands up as he always did, probing out of nowhere. Like you said, Pat, he just has like, that kind of like really quick power that's sudden out of nowhere. Boom, and sent Fennec with the right hand. Fennec just drops, right? And it wasn't no flash knockdown. Like Fennec's face was just like, oh shit. And everyone else just kind of fell silent too, like, what? Fennec had been dropped earlier in his career once or twice. Like but a guy who just bounced back up immediately. That was the first time where he was just like hurt, like legitimately hurt. And kind of like to a lesser degree, the Salvador Sanchez, Wilfredo Gomez fight. Fennec had pockets of success here and there during the fight because, Nelson would lean back and let Fennec work a little bit. And Fennec would try to do, the bullying and everything. But it wasn't like in the first fight where you could tell Fennec was in control. Nelson seemed in control the whole time, even if he let Fennec try to, take the initiative. It was always like Nelson just knew where he was doing, what was going on, and was just in total control. And whenever he wanted to step it up again, Fennec would be back in trouble, whether it was getting dropped or just generally beat up. And then when he finished him hard, And that could have, that should have been the end of their rivalry right there because like Nelson really emphatically proved himself. Listen, man, I had a bad time the first time, but I proved myself in the rematch and knocked your boy out. Like, what do you need? And Fennec's career at that point did like skip for a little while. He fought Calvin Grove immediately after that. And Calvin Grove, good fighter, former featherweight champion, but is not going to be recognized by anyone or mistaken by anyone for having Tommy Hearns like power. And instead, Fennec made him look like Tommy Hearns that night, getting knocked absolutely unconscious with a one punch knockout. I think it was a right hand or a hook, right? That flattened him.
Yeah.
And watch it. Fennec has like blood streaming from his mouth while he's laying there unconscious. Like it's a nasty, nasty knockout. And everyone thought his career would be over by then. He took a few years off. I mean, I know he definitely a guy like him. It took a while for him to like realize his career was over and get knocked out like that is not a person like that can handle. So took a few years off. He comes back. He was actually under the tutelage of Emmanuel Stewart when he came back in the around 1995 and scored a couple of comeback wins. But then he ends up fighting Philip Holiday for the lightweight championship. And that's one of those things too, man. Is that like when a former champion comes back, unlike George Foreman or say like Larry Holmes or even Roberto Duran for instance, when they come back, it only takes like a fight or two before they get thrown into like a high profile name, whether it's going to be a world champion or it's going to be like just whatever. Like remember the name for instance Rodolfo Blanco, the
Yeah.
flyweight, the Colombian flyweight champion from the early 90s. Not a lot of people will remember this, but like he made a random comeback in like the mid 90s, right? The mid to late 90s. And I think he had like one or two wins and then automatically got a fight with Johnny Tapia like out of nowhere for like the WBO strap, you know what I mean? Which he lost comprehensively. And I think he ended up going on to lose almost every other fight for the rest of his career. But that's what I'm just trying to use it as an example. Like, a guy, they come back and after like two or three fights, they just get thrown into either like, a high profile fight with a contender or hell, even a title fight. A guy like Fennec's name, he just got thrown right into a title fight. And it was also in Australia because Holiday at that time was not a name that, could command him to go to South Africa. Regardless, it ended up being a disaster and Holiday trounced him in 2 rounds. But, time goes on. Him and Nelson both end up retiring. They're both in the Hall of Fame. And you would just think that nothing was, kind of over. Like, yeah, Fennec was always bitter that he didn't win that first fight. But it always seemed like, they were trying to go bend over backwards to try to make them, for whatever reason, for that fight in particular, to right that wrong. They like, they haven't never tried to go back on Chavez Taylor or question any of shit or do all these other fights. Everything just has to be predicated on that one. So not only did they try to reverse the decision or whatever you said they did, even though on box record doesn't show that, and make Fennec a de facto champion, but in 2008 they end up having a third fight.
Which itself had its own backstory about like Azuma later said that he got into it and signed up for it under the understanding that it was going to be an exhibition, that it wasn't going to count against records, and that they were, not going to take it
Yeah, exactly
seriously,
what I
or
told them.
that it was in the spirit of kind of, just like friendly rivalry or whatever. And that when he showed up, that Fennec was taking it serious, and he was like, oh shit, according to him. Because, like I said, some of the stuff in his book is kind of just like,
Mm,
come on, dude. But nonetheless, it could possibly be believable, especially because, like you said, the way that they keep trying to treat it and trying to like push, like, do this retroactive like changing of the fucking decision.
yeah.
Leave it alone, because if you're gonna start doing that type of shit, that's a fucking Pandora's box you don't want to fucking open, bro. But yeah, that is an extremely
Imagine,
unnecessary
imagine
fight.
going to somebody, imagine going to someone's house of like a former world champion who since passed away and going to their kids and be like, hey, actually, your grandfather wasn't champ. We're taking his belt back. We're reversing the decision of his fight from 1977. Like, what?
That would actually be a great premise for like a comedy skit or like a show or something, dude. Like the people who have to go around to the fucking houses and like,
Yeah, imagine like
Mrs.
Mauricio's.
Smith, yeah, I'm here actually because back in 1972, it looks like your grandpa, he was given a belt, and they're taking that back.
What do you mean they're taking it back? Well, come to find out, your grandpa probably got a decision he didn't deserve. So yeah, we're just reversing that shit now.
Yeah, so the World Boxing Organization believe what? Fuck that, dude. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know why they put that effort through for Jeff Fennick seems like a cool guy. Nothing against him. And he's been
Very nice guy.
obviously he was very good for Australian boxing and hugely popular at the time. There was like tens of thousands of people there for the rematch with Zuma Nelson, and obviously that's carried over too. Our boy Georgie Kambosos, big
Mm.
massive star, our favorite. We love him. He's all right. But no, he was obviously instrumental. Fennec that was for Australian boxing, kind of keeping it
He
alive
became a
during that
good
time.
trainer too afterwards.
That's true. Yeah, no, he trained a number of fighters, both in Australia and remember he trained Mike Tyson for a little bit.
He did. And the what fight was on Top Rank the other day, the Top Rank channel. Arce against Hussein.
Yeah, that's right. He trained the
Their
Hussein
first fight.
brothers. That's right.
Yeah, and then their first fight, you hear Fennec yelling all the time, "Get off the ropes, do this!" Bloody hell! Just like losing his shit during that fight. That was a hell of a fight.
That was a real fun fight. Yeah, dude got smashed in the rematch, but the first one was real fun.
Sure.
Yeah, dude. And speaking of Mike Tyson, I'm going to bring up one that's somewhat unnecessary. And I mean, perhaps not in quite the same way, but just because, mostly because I'm not going to lie, it's fun to talk about and it's funny. And there's at least a few elements about it that are hilarious that'll make us laugh and hopefully make people who remember it laugh as well. And that's Tyson McNeely. It's because, I mean,
Yeah.
Tyson is such obviously, he's still so massively popular now for slightly different reasons, but also a lot of nostalgic reasons for people who are roughly our age and a little bit older who remember his rise to fame in the 80s and how popular he continued to be, even when he was in prison and I feel like I'm doing a disservice if I don't mention why, for rape. But, you know, just don't want to be that asshole. But when he was in prison, I remember TV shows and everywhere still talking about him, taking shots, all sorts of comedians, everything. Like he was still a massive pop culture name uh in, some celebrity names and shit like that. And so I get it. I understand and his name was still exploitable at this time, but he goes to prison and his previous line about how he could sell out Madison Square Garden, or was it sell pay-per-views masturbating, or
Yeah, some
fuck,
ridiculous.
I can't remember exactly what he said, but you get the gist.
Mhm.
And basically some version of Donald Trump's how he could fucking still win the election and shoot somebody on fucking Main Ave, whatever the fuck he was talking about. Who gives a fuck? Point is clearly pointing out the toxicity
Yeah.
of the popularity and the fact that it could very easily be exploited, and not only be exploited, but as it's being exploited, tell you to your face that it's being exploited and that they're cashing in off of it. And so that was a lot of, very strange kind of reflection about that event in particular, especially because it was Mike Tyson's return from prison into boxing. It was not a title fight in any regard or anything like that, but just how massive it sold and how much interest there was. And then, of course, everything about it. It was classic.
Dude, I mean, I remember before the fight, like, the whole build up toward it and Tyson's return, getting out of jail, the discussions if he was just gonna get into an immediate title fight and all that other stuff. And then also being from New England, definitely knew who Peter McNeely was back then. Like I've talked about this before, man. Boston sports in the mid 90s were an interesting time, all right. Celtics were not bad, but they weren't particularly good either. Red Sox, I'm not a baseball fan, but they weren't
Oh,
doing
they were
shit.
hurting. They had the curse. They were hurting.
Yeah, you know, and Patriots were not good in the mid 90s. It was still a few years before Tom Brady would show up. And then I'm not a hockey fan, but I don't recall what the Bruins were doing back then. But anyways, when it came to boxing, that's what he had. It was like Peter McNeely. You know what I mean? He was kind of encompassing everything that you needed to for that point. Like Mickey Ward was still a couple of years away before really breaking out. And so, in the mainstream and well, other than that, you had Ray Oliveira, who at that point was kind of, in and out of trouble and trying to gain footing. And Yeah, there wasn't much else going on in New England boxing. So Pina McNeely, who his dad Tom McNeely, former heavyweight contender, I guess you want to call him the contender, whatever, who fought Floyd Patterson for the heavyweight title.
Your
I mean, it's
Massachusetts
hard for me to
accent's
call that
coming
guy a
out.
legit,
Your Massachusetts accent's coming out because you're talking about it.
but it's like it's hard for me to like legitimately call that man a contender for that era because Tom McNeely essentially sucked as a fighter. Let's be honest here; he wasn't really good. You know what I mean? He just came from the custom
Yeah,
model school. Of, hey, he's safe, so let's fight him. But
unfortunately kind of lumped in, but correctly lumped in with the string of contenders that or the
yeah,
title shot guys who got title shots who didn't really deserve it.
sure. But McNeely was a popular dude, and if you watch the fights, they find every type of schlub and bum and everything you can get for to McNeely to go through. You know what I mean? They, for instance, JB Williamson, the former light heavyweight title holder from the mid '80s, he fights McNeely twice, and both of those are on YouTube, and they're fucking hysterical because because Williamson completely cans both of them, doesn't try at all, especially in the second fight. He stands there and just walks out, and the first time like McNeely even whiffs at him, he just drops. Doesn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? Just there to take his $300 and go home. He doesn't give a shit. And all these things are being held, like local fucking VFW halls and all that stuff, right? But eventually, you rack up enough wins on the local circuit, and you start building enough of a name, and if you got, I hate to say it, but if you have the right complexion, you'll get noticed, especially at heavyweight. And Don King certainly took notice. He was never going to turn a wrong eye to a guy like McNeely, who, to his credit, even though he was a limited fighter, and we find out just how limited he had a fun style and he had a fun personality. Like he was easy to like, you know what I mean? And then you
He was
find
going to
out his
bring the fight. Like he was going to come to fight. He wasn't going to dance
absolutely.
around.
And he when you see the interviews with his dad and he talks there's a fire truck outside if you hear that shit.
I was like, bro, you fucking being haunted or
So live in New York, man. I can't help the crazy ass sounds you be hearing out
old
there.
buildings? I don't know. Poltergeist.
Buildings out here are old as shit. So Don King eventually signs McNeely, and it's with the idea that he's gonna match him, and I guess would definitely would have brought in a lot of money with his newly minted champion Oliver McCall. And the idea was that they were gonna open up. I think it was because the Boston Garden was being changed to the Fleet Center around this time. And I think Don's idea was that they were going to have them as like the opening, one of the open acts at the Fleet Center for a big fight was going to be McCall against McNeely. And that place definitely would have got packed out for that, even though McCall would have killed him. But, things happen in boxing. McCall fights Larry Holmes, eventually loses it to Frank Bruno. And then Tyson gets out. And so McNeely now, instead of being built for a potential McCall fight, now he's being, the sacrificial lamb for Tyson. And like you said, everybody knew that this was going to be absolute bullshit, whatever. But like the excitement of Tyson being back, I think, kind of like overrode that. You know what I mean? And even like Ring Magazine, which I know you just got a million copies from the '90s, so you can verify these now, and others weren't even like really. I mean, they were kind of shitting on the fight, like they weren't putting it in its proper place, but at the same time, they weren't outright saying, "Oh, this shouldn't be on pay-per-view." Like they were just hyped that Tyson was back.
That was the thing, dude, is that I know a lot of people like to don't listen to a lot of these old guard writers and shit like that. They're talking to, with their a lot of the shit that they're talking because they got caught up in all the same type of hype. And, like now where every other fucking article is about Canelo, every other
Mhm.
fucking article is about Tank or whoever the popular fighters are. That's who all the press is about. That was the same way then, bro. And those fucking, sanctimonious dicks that are talking now like they were like, oh, we didn't do that because we wrote for such and such magazine and we fuck that. Yeah, you did. And I got a massive stack. These boxes right next to me are all filled with the evidence, and I've thumbed through it all over the last
Yeah.
month. So I know for certain that y'all were full of shit. Point is that no, nobody was going, oh, I think Manili's got a chance. Like, oh, pretty much nobody. There were some people who were saying things like, understandably, we don't know what Tyson's going to do when if he takes a hard punch. We don't know what's going to happen because he's been in prison, so we don't fucking know. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with saying that, but they were also saying like, but McNeil kind of sucks. Everybody fucking knew it, and all you got to do is use your eyes. Dude. You see McNeely hitting the. It looks like me hitting the heavy bag. It looks awful, terrible. Like there's no skill. He's squared up. He doesn't have very good. He doesn't have any footwork really. He kind of just walks right up to his opponent, and so I mean, the point is that like people were saying this has to be a really awful version of Mike Tyson for this to not go well for him or for McNeely to walk out of this. Everybody knew exactly what time it was, but that was the point, like you said, is that it didn't matter. It didn't matter. It was all about Mike Tyson coming back. That was the important thing. We need to see what Mike Tyson looks like because he's still Mike Tyson. And if he's still even just a glimmer of what he was, we're in for a ride. And guess what, dude? We were.
Dude, before that, it was funny too because when Showtime was trying to build McNeely or whatever they were going to do with him, I think they were being forced fed. I don't think they were trying to build it on. That wasn't their idea on their own to feature McNeely. But before the Tyson fight, and this was in 1995, they showed a clip of him. I forgot what the whole card was. It was in Worcester, so I want to say the card was off the top of my head. It was like Orlin Norris against Adolfo Washington or something like that. It doesn't matter what the main event was, but that was the card, right? It was
Yeah.
in Worcester. And since it was in Worcester, it was
Or
McNeely.
Worcester, for those of you not from Massachusetts.
Yeah, oh yeah. So the card was held there, and McNeely fought the 15-41 Danny Warford. And they showed clips of that before they got to the main fights. They showed clips of that, right? And they're like, yeah, so McNeely potentially having a Mike Tyson like that. You can hear Steve Albert. He has no type of like excitement in his voice or nothing. He's just like, you're really forcing me to talk about this shit on the air right now. While they were showing McNeely just clumsily waddle through and wave punches at this dude who's fucking horrible and just there to take a drop as he did. And they're like, oh yeah, and McNeely stops him. He's aggressive and like,
Great mullet.
yeah, they're trying to find words of what to describe, and they're just kind of like so checked out on that. You know what I mean? It's hilarious. But it's McNeely, to his credit, he said he was going to bring the thunder, right? Like he was hilarious in the pre-fight interviews, talking what he was going to do at the press conference. And I remember he's talked about everyone's going to be taking a dump in their pants if they don't believe him
You
or
got
some
a
shit.
giant dump in your pants, and
Yeah.
everyone just goes like, "Was that the punchline?"
Or the greatest pre-fight interview of all time
Of all
with
time,
Jim Gray, and he was like, Peter, how do you feel? He's like, this is from my mother, my father,
seconds
Carly,
from sobbing,
yeah,
seconds from
my
crying.
three brothers, and last but not least, Snubby.
No,
And then
and
I was like,
last but not least,
Mad Fun! And the way he yells that, I'm like, yes, that sums up New England in the mid '90s right there. McNeely just rambling and screaming at fucking television. So, um,
a man of his time, a man of his time, 100%.
1,000%. I love Hurricane Pete. So he comes over and like we said, bro, he did try. All right, man. To his credit, he went out there and started swinging for the fences. I wasn't like he was scared. Like I think Tyson, I hate to say it, but I think Tyson was slightly taken aback at first too. Like,
I
oh
think it
shit,
caught
like,
him off guard.
yeah, yeah. And then Tyson even said so afterwards. He was like, oh, he was, coming at me. And McNeely might have hit him once. I don't know. Wasn't really anything hard, but Tyson, I mean, what can be said? Tyson barely really got off anything besides that uppercut at the end. But I mean, like the first time he dropped him, McNeely was just so fucking wound up. The only thing he realized what happened, he gets up and he starts
He
running
runs
around
around the ring. Yeah.
all wide eyed and stuff, right? But Tyson didn't look that good either. I mean, in retrospect, we gotta remember it back then. It was only like a 30-second fight, but Tyson looked rusty as shit. And it didn't look much better against Buster Mathis and subsequently so on and so forth. But like, yeah, that was just one of those. It made a ridiculous amount of money. It was an absolute fucking fiasco. And I want to say that came out, but that fight happened before the Great White Hype came out, didn't it? Or no, was the Great White Hype before that fight?
I want to say Great White Hype was 96, so that would have been a year before, I guess. But let me make sure.
That
Point
would have
is
been,
that it was right around the same time. I
yeah.
mean, here, yeah, 96, and it came out in May of 96.
Okay.
So, yeah, well, in any case, it doesn't even really matter because the time is pretty dang close. Like, as far as, yeah, so Tyson McNeely, 95. Great White hype the following year. So it makes sense. You know what I mean? Like it makes perfect sense because like you were saying, and like we were just kind of reiterating, the hype around Tyson coming back was so massive that they clearly realized, not like now where you can track the popularity of like search terms and all that type of stuff. You can track it any time of day, whenever. Back then, it was a little bit more difficult to track. You probably had to rely more on like word of mouth and shit like that. Like,
Sure.
oh, I think this is going to be a big one. Vegas bettors are taking a lot of bets, that type of shit. These days, you don't rely on that type of shit nearly as much. And back then, they clearly at some point realized, like, oh, it doesn't even matter who we put them in with. Fuck it,
Yeah.
let's go. You know what I mean? And that's what they did.
And fucking McNeely, his boxing career never panned out after that. I mean, he got some more high profile fights, but like immediately after that, because it was the 90s and anyone that was involved in some ridiculous shit became kind of a minor celebrity after that. Remember the Pizza Hut commercials
I
he
will
did where
never forget it. I will
he got
never
knocked
forget
out
it.
by a slice of pepperoni or whatever, this goofy
Yeah, it
train or
goes and
yeah,
yeah, I will never forget that.
man. But and then he ends up getting stopped by Butterbean in the first round. And I feel bad for McNeely at that point because, like, I think during that point in his life too, he was on drugs and going through a lot of shit, and probably shouldn't have been in the ring. And as much as we love to, it's easy to rack on the bean and stuff like that. I personally love Butterbean, but like, as easy it
I
is
ain't
to
trying
make.
to stand there and take that fucking punch.
I'm saying, man, no one in their right mind is going to stand there and take a bunch of bean bombs straight to the head over and
Fuck
over and
no.
over. Nah, like my man could throw those haymakers, and like and he took that fight seriously. Remember how like before the fight, Butterbean, this was like, his first name guy that he was fighting that like could have been, I guess, legit. And so like he was storming around the ring like a fucking 88 Tyson, just getting ready.
Well, I mean, not to get off track, but like I get it because everybody thought he was the butt of every joke. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like right around that time, they were putting Butterbean, Mia St. John. I feel bad for Mia St. John too. She was like a legitimate fighter. It was just that
yeah, her
women's
career.
boxing was constantly shit on. So I mean, like, but Butterbean was lumped in as like the circus freak. He's a sideshow, not a real fighter. And whatever you feel about him, whatever. I'm simply saying that from his perspective, if you're knocking motherfuckers out, whether they're good or not, and somebody comes up to you and say like, dude, you ain't shit, you're
Mhm.
fucking not shit, and you're a sideshow, you might be pissed off too. And then finally when you get a chance to prove yourself, you're just like, what's up? And that's what he did. I mean, hey, right, McNeely was not a very good fighter, but Butterbean knocked his ass out and laid him out. So it was like Bean was kind of like saying, hey bro, like I'm a fighter too.
Oh no, Bean was pissed. I know that. I just remember him before that fight. I'm like, oh boy, he looks ready. Like he.
This is no Bart Gunn.
Oh no, no. Jesus Christ, that's a whole other one.
Poor Bart.
And before that too, man, they really tried to build Bart Gunn up, and they were like,
Showing clips and shit. He's fucking
yeah, and also too, that was WWE's way, I guess, of punishing him. I found out
yeah,
because
yeah,
they
yeah, yeah.
they were pissed off that he won that little tournament, that they fucked up their plans and everything like that, because Bart Gunn could legitimately fight, and so they threw him in with Bean. Ugh. But all right, I'm not even sure now if you would consider I don't, because considering the circumstances, I don't know if I would want to say it was just like um unnecessary. I mean, I guess they would be though, but I'm gonna go I'm actually going way back with this, right? Because it was a couple of title fights where heavyweight champions were involved, where I guess the story behind both of them is that they were trying to help out an old friend who needed it. But then, in retrospect, did they really need to knock out a guy to help give them an old, to help them
Okay,
out or
so I already know
something?
what one is.
Yeah. So both of them would, Jack Dempsey, Billy Misk, and then Joe Lewis, John Henry Lewis.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
What do
Well,
you
and
think? Do you think that like it's necessary? Okay, I'm gonna help the guy, I'll give him a payday and stuff like that, or but I still have to knock his ass out, or is it like, okay, maybe I can just like do a charity for him or some shit to try to help him? I don't know.
I think in both cases, I don't know as much about Joe Lewis. I do know that with Jack Dempsey, people have written a ton about the fact that he like didn't hold back in sparring and that he was basically incapable of pulling his punches and and I don't know for certain because I don't have like super great video of it or whatever, but like for instance the Cowboy Latrell fight later
Mhm.
on when Dempsey was long retired, like he literally punched the shit out of Cowboy Latrell, like
Oh, I've seen the
punched
video.
the
Yeah,
shit out
yeah,
of him. And I mean, and I supposedly there's some history behind that too. Like Latrell was legitimately talking shit, like, bro, you ain't shit. Like you weren't ever shit. You're a draft dodger, all this type of shit. And that Dempsey was like, you really? You
yeah.
want to do this for real? And so fucking like beat the shit out of him and actually did. But nonetheless, point is that people have said on numerous occasions that Dempsey just couldn't pull his punches, whether sparring, real fight, or whatever. And so that is kind of like, I can understand that. Lewis, I don't know, but I could definitely tell you that even though there's no real good video of it, I think there was some clips, like a some like couple second clips of it going around years ago. But there's no real good video of Joe Lewis versus John Henry Lewis. But there's a lot of photos, and I mean, John Henry Lewis is like in the ropes, like dude just got fucking flattened to hell. And in any case, yeah, dude, I don't know if I have an opinion on whether or not they needed to do that. I just don't know if they could have done it any differently, being who they were, because they
I
were
mean,
just those kind
what
of
I'm saying is
fighters.
that, like, that they even need to like fight them.
No, no, yeah, I know what you
Yeah,
mean.
it's like because I mean, like John Henry
Yeah,
Lewis
why
was a
didn't you just give them money?
yeah, like something like that. Like John Henry Lewis was a great light heavyweight champion. All right, don't get me wrong. A definite Hall of Famer, great fighter from the early 20s and early 30s, stuff like that. Just a guy who fought a who's who. But by the time he got in there with Lewis, he was a former champion with very bad eyes. Like his eyesight was basically
Yeah, one
non-existent.
eye was like unusable or something.
Yeah, yeah, and he was just in really bad shape. And I don't think the last place he needed to be was fighting the heavyweight champion of the world, even though Joe Lewis was his buddy. And I know Lewis kind of, took mercy and took it out and took him out really quickly, I guess, to save him from any pain and stuff like that. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm thinking just in myself. I don't know. I'm thinking there could have been other ways you could have helped him instead of just be
They
like, hey
did
man, I'll give you
benefit
a
shows, bro.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? They did benefit shows at this point. I don't know why they couldn't do that.
And I
No,
know I don't
that's a
know if
good
John
point.
Henry's career really went on. I think that might have been his last fight.
No, that was
But
his last fight. Yeah, he
Billy
retired.
Misk is different because for whatever reason I thought after the Dempsey fight that like he didn't really fight much after that. And he died soon after. I know he did die soon after, but I didn't realize he had so many fights after Dempsey still.
Yeah, Dempsey has like three autobiographies. One of them's a pretty good one because I think he speaks the most frankly in it. I think
Mhm.
it's the Bob Considine one. I want to say. I don't remember who wrote it, but anyway, point is, or who ghost wrote it or helped him write it. But point is, he talks about the Miskey fight I think it's that one. And I'm not gonna lie, dude, I don't have it memorized, so I don't remember what all he was saying. But I do remember him saying that like he talks about the that's right, he talks about the relationships that he has with a number of different fighters around the time, and that he
Mhm.
had known a bunch of his opponents because he was a sparring partner for a bunch of his future opponents as he was coming up and shit like that. And so he had, I think if I remember correctly, good things to say about Billy Miskey, though. There were a bunch of other fighters that he fucking hated.
Sure. And I know that like when Miskey got the shot with Dempsey, like I think he was already like suffering from like consumption or tuberculosis. No, Bright's disease. That's what it
Yeah.
was, right? And I don't even know what Bright's disease
Some
is.
sort of wasting
I don't,
disease. Yeah.
yeah, but he still went on to have like actually looking at it, he was still fighting like general go around of like certain guys like, Bill Brennan and Bob Roper and Fred Fulton, for instance, Tommy Gibbons. So I mean, all right, maybe that wasn't as bad as I thought because I didn't realize he fought on that long. But I mean, it was only a couple of years after that, and then he passed away soon after. But for him to go around still fighting that with that disease was pretty fucking crazy.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I mean, there's perhaps maybe
Mhm.
a better example, or at least maybe on paper, a better example could be James Corbett versus Peter Jackson.
Okay.
Because Peter Jackson was already supposedly, I don't know that there's any proof of it, but supposedly Peter Jackson was already dying of tuberculosis
Oh,
when,
When he fought Corbett or Jeffries?
or did I say Corbett?
Yeah.
I might have
I'm
meant
about to say he
Jeffries.
went to
Yeah,
he won
yeah, I might have meant
61 rounds
Jeffries.
with tuberculosis.
My
He
bad.
might be the strongest man in the world.
Yeah, I might have. I think I misspoke, but I don't know why I mixed those two up. Maybe because they're just both boring ass white heavyweights. But in any case, yeah, supposedly, and again, I don't know how true that is. Supposedly, Peter Jackson already had tuberculosis and was kind of, not on. his deathbed, obviously, but was starting to waste away or whatever. Um, anyway, so but even then, again, that's kind of just like a speculation. I don't know that it's ever been proven that he actually had tuberculosis at the end of his career, but he
Yeah.
definitely died very quickly after that.
Mhm. I agree. Okay. So what would be your next one then?
Let's see. Like I said, I didn't really go back very far. I guess a good one that just kind of popped up in my head, even though it's got a little bit of an overlap, um, with kind of like a fights that probably shouldn't have been taken, and that's Tommy Morrison versus Michael Bent.
Oh yeah,
Or
yeah.
I guess you could reverse
I
those
mean,
names given
yeah,
how it
we've
went.
discussed that. That's about as unnecessary a fight as there. That's a good one too, because it's not so much that it was like a mismatch or like whatever it may be or something like it was just like, why are you doing this? And everybody around you saying, don't do it.
Poor timing, wrong opponent to choose. I mean, just for a number of different reasons, it was a bad choice. And on top of that, especially considering the momentum that Morrison had, you know, when he got the loss, dude, with a fight with it was Lennox Lewis, right? I want to say it was like six
Yeah,
million
Lennox
dollars
Lewis.
or eight
Yeah,
million
it was
dollars.
$6 million to fight Lennox Lewis, and
Jesus, dude.
we both said it too that like I don't think Morrison would have won that fight regardless of when it took place, but he would have had a much better chance fighting the Lewis that was around back then than he did, the Lewis that he ended up encountering a few years later. So
Well, and for a handful of different reasons too. I mean, obviously for because of his own health and deterioration, and his career deteriorating, and the damage that he took in the meantime, and then the fact that Lewis got better, and he was a gangly, kind of off balance, powerful, good jab, but kind of unpredictable type of fighter at that point. Looked a little bit more like Frank Bruno than what he wound up turning out to be. Just kind of an unbridled kind of mauling type of guy sometimes. And Tommy Morrison would have had a better time against that version of Lennox Lewis. But I mean, yeah, dude screwed it up by taking on Michael Bent, who was a very, very good amateur and, just seemed like a guy who had kind of lost his way and had only had 11 fights coming into that, too. So, I mean, probably at least on paper, a safer fight than what it wound up being. But, dude, don't fight where there's a three knockdown rule, Tommy.
I mean that too, and like you're fighting in front of your hometown crowd, which is like
Too many
a
things about
recipe
it
for
went wrong.
disaster. Too many people, yeah, you guarantee you he was out gallivanting before the fights and doing whatever he was doing, which was, with copious amounts of women and various other things. And
He's had
yeah,
like five girlfriends of the same name and shit.
totally. When we did the Tommy Morrison show, we talked about his style and just how like even though he was explosive and he had fast hands and a monstrous left hook and yada yada yada, but like he just made so many fucking mistakes. Anytime he would do that, and he never really fixed them either. And that was his problem. He never really fixed shit that he needed to in his career. And that's why trainers would get so pissed off with him because he never really progressed from what he was because he didn't have to. You know what I mean? Half the time, and he was always just knocking dudes out, and so he didn't think that, and then he would end up struggling with guys he shouldn't have. So, anyways, one of his biggest problems is that, like, when Morrison would get you hurt, he would end up squaring up sometimes. You know what I mean? Trying to get you out of there. Like, you go up, and then you just go right there and just try, and if you were able to punch with him and like get through, you were able to hit him because Morrison didn't have great defense and he was wide open when he was starting to get on you. So if you were able to counter and weather the storm, not an easy thing to do because he was so powerful, but if you were able to do it, you had a chance, and that's exactly what Bent did. He got hit with the left hook. He went running. He went flying into the ropes. Morrison chased after him. Morrison starts opening up, trying to get him out there for a quick KO, and he's wide open while he's doing that. Bent, who, even though, like you said, he only had 11 pro fights, he had been a long-time amateur, a very top amateur who almost made the 88 team, barely missed it, and was a guy who generally had better skills than Morrison when it came down to it. And he had faster hands than Morrison. So he came in, pop, 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 caught Morrison in between. Morrison goes down, still dazed. Two more, it's over.
Yeah, it was a three knockdown rule in Tulsa, and I mean, it wasn't even like he was hurt. I'm not gonna say he
Yeah,
wasn't that
yeah.
hurt. He was hurt, and he was obviously hurt enough to go down, but it wasn't like he was laid out or anything like that. And also on top of that, he was one of those types of fighters that he didn't have the presence of mind or wherewithal to like take a knee. He'd
Yep.
just get like caught in the middle of a combination or something like that, and he'd get up real quick. Like he was that was another issue is that not saying well, I'm Mr. fucking knockdown expert if I get hurt, but like, you get hurt and you get a mandatory 8 count. Take that 8 count. You get the full fucking 8 count. Take that 8 count, bro. Don't like a good example, Trinidad Vargas.
Yeah.
Fucking Vargas gets hurt and then immediately is like scrambling to get up. Like it's like, bro, your legs are fucking cooked. Give it a second. You know what I mean? Makes it look worse. Zab Judah Zoo, you know what I mean? Like hops up and boop, back down fucking like 5 different times. So same thing with Tommy Morrison, same kind of guy. Knocked down and he's like scrambling to get up and then he's too hurt and the fight goes on. But just a bad decision in a number of different ways. And I think that documentary a couple of years ago, 30 for 30 or wherever it was on Tommy Morrison, did a pretty good job of hammering home that he had that syndrome of like a big fish in a small pond where he got his ass kissed at home and was a
Yeah.
big celebrity and everybody fucking loved him and kissed his ass. And so he never felt like he had to go beyond that. And then when he did, and when they took him to big cities and shit like that, he was always homesick and he didn't like being challenged, basically. He didn't like having to fucking get out of his comfort zone. And ultimately, that and other things wound up leading to his downfall.
1,000%, man. And I've loved Morrison. We talked about that when we did his show and other stuff. I have fond memories of being a fan of his growing up because he just made for exciting fights. But the dude had so many demons, and like you said, he didn't want to travel outside of his hometown because he was a superstar where he lived, and everybody was just worshiped the ground he walked on. So he was good over there. You know what I mean? But like all these different vices and things that he went through, and the denying of HIV and eventually AIDS and all this stuff. It just stained everything he built up on. You know what I mean? Like
And now his
he,
ex like stalking us on our social
oh
media
yeah,
because she's
seriously, bro.
crazy.
I don't block anyone on social media because I just don't really engage with people like that. And I've had to block her on like every type of thing we can possibly imagine because she still will find me somewhere.
It's
And then
crazy,
she
bro.
sends her little crazy as like Trump, crazy maniacal assholes over there trying to attack us too. I mean, I ain't even about to get
Yeah, I've
into that
had people
thing,
who
but
like
like
are like asking me about them, and I'm like, what the fuck? Tell them to fuck off. What are you talking about? They're crazy, bro. For real.
seriously. But it's too bad because like a guy like Morrison, he was so popular that even though when he would lose, like he got his ass kicked in the Lennox Lewis fight. It was bad, you know what I mean? Like he wasn't really competitive at all, aside from maybe like landing a punch or two. And he still had enough of a marketable name that Don King was able to sign him up after that and was going to build him up to fight Tyson, which he was going to make a massive amount of money on. Like, he fucked everything up, man. It's a tragic case, but that is what it is in
Yeah.
boxing. So I got one more, I think, in me one. Yeah. So like I was gonna say Larry Holmes Butterbean, man, because I mean, like, what the fuck was that, right? That was just like, who knows? But I mean, I don't need to. Like, Larry Holmes was on his own little trajectory of doing weird shit back then, so like, whatever. And plus, the fact that he was like, how old was he? Pushing almost 60 at that point, and
God, yeah, he's in his 50s. Yeah.
and Butterbean at that point as well was definitely getting bigger in girth than what he was when he first came on the scene in the 90s. It was just was not a good fight to watch. And I don't even feel like we're living that right now. But since it was the anniversary, we talked about it. It was the anniversary of it recently, and it kind of gets overshadowed. Actually, it gets very overshadowed because of what happened in the first fight, the co-feature, which was Robert Allen, Bernard Hopkins, like we talked about that first fight. So this fight, and it's disgusting too. It was a disgusting fight that got made, and everyone involved in it should have been ashamed. And that was Roberto Duran against William Joppy.
Imagine going to that fight card, dude. I'd be walking away so angry. I'd be like, fuck
Seriously.
boxing. What the fuck, bro? You got the referee pushing one guy out of the fucking ring, and then I'm going here watching fucking William Joppy beating the shit out of Manos de Piedra over here, bro. What are we doing? Oh, the great old 90s, dude.
Oh yeah, trust me. I mean, when everyone talks about Showtime and talks about how like, oh, they had those great pay-per-views that Don King put on, sure, fine, whatever. All right, we can get all joyful about the pay-per-views during that time period. But like we talked about this the other day, man. During the mid 90s and the late 90s, for every good pay-per-view that they had, Like usually after that, you would get shit like a Fabrice Tioso title defense, Keith Holmes, William Joppy, uh, Frankie Lyles. After Lyles lost, then what was that dude who beat him? Fucking Mitchell. Um, just on and on fights like that. Cruiserweights that were just boring as shit, like just not good stuff to watch. Ricardo Lopez beating up at guys who had no business beating in the ring with him. Like, it just was not a good era. I mean, there was, don't get me wrong, there was some standout fights during that time that we've discussed before, but like no, there were few and far in between. And I remember
I was
initially,
just gonna say, dude, since we're like, I'm just gonna lump mine onto this one since you mentioned Roberto Duran. I was gonna bring up both Vinny Paz fights and the fucking both Hector Camacho fights. So I was just gonna say, lump all these Roberto Duran fights in together. Unnecessary, unnecessary.
especially the rematches, like, all right.
Yeah,
So
how were there like two of them?
I mean, before I'll get back to I'll hop off of Duran Joppy really quick. All right, let's go to Duran Paz. Right, their first fight was in '94. Duran at that point was definitely washed, but he was still like a serviceable
Yeah,
name.
he's still like
And
kind of viable. So it's like, all right, all right, all right.
yeah, yeah, and Pazienza, Javi came back from the car accident. He was a big name himself and popular, and you knew it was gonna at least bring like the curiosity aspect into it too. Right, and I don't think it was an expensive pay per view.
Yeah, they're
Probably was
both
like.
above, well above their optimal weight. So it's kind of like, all right, we'll maybe entertain this here.
Unfortunately, I don't want to say unfortunately. Well, kind of unfortunately, because the forced a rematch, Duran might have won that first fight. He dropped Pazienza, bloodied him up, and like I remember watching that with my dad, and my dad and his like uncles were like, "Yo, Duran's kicking his ass. What the hell?" Because and what she generally was, I think. You know what I mean? Like I have not watched that fight in years, and I don't really intend to go back to it because I don't care. But like from what I remember of that first one, Duran made it close enough that it looked like he might have got jobbed. So yes, they had to
Yeah,
go
that's
do a
why they
rematch.
have the rematch. Yeah.
And they had that stupid rematch where Duran lost much more, convincingly. And then you move on to Camacho, same thing. Like Duran beat him up in the first fight somehow again. And it makes you think that, like, all right, whatever. But then they had to have a fucking rematch in 2001.
And there was like 5 years had gone. It wasn't even like that's what I didn't understand was that it was like I'm like, bro, what? Yeah, I didn't understand that
And I
one at
don't know
all.
if that was on pay-per-view, if that was on Fox. That was televised. All right.
It
And it was
was,
like
but I don't
big
remember
arena
what it was
too. It was
on.
like it was in Denver, I think, at like the
Yeah, I want to
Pepsi.
say it was on some weird pay-per-view or something, dude.
But the only thing I have in my mind, and I wish I can get it out, but you just made me remember it now, bringing up that fucking fight, is that before their rematch, the Duran Camacho rematch, I saw this visual of Duran shadow boxing in fucking these like wrestling trunks, like the little small, like the regular like '80s trunks that wrestlers wear. Like briefs, right? And Duran is literally just wearing like fucking wrestling trunks, like something you see Hulk Hogan and then dudes back in the day. But this is like fucking Duran in his 50s doing this, right? And he has a giant gut over him and his things, and he's there shadow boxing wearing that. And I was just like, Jesus Christ, I'm not watching this. But you know, Duran was one of those guys, like you said, out of the Kings, Hagler was long retired at this point. Leonard attempted a couple of comebacks, but they failed miserably. And Hearns was on the same trajectory as Duran, but he didn't have the same high profile fights that Duran did. Like we talked about that before too. Like there was always like rumors that he was going to get a big fight, but it just kind of always fell through, and then he would just kind of stay whatever. Duran would always get them random ones because maybe it was because he was around the more than like by the time in the '90s Hearns was a cruiserweight, so like trying to find big fights for him was going to be like more difficult than say Duran, who was still hovering around 160, 168,
Yeah, and Hearns
whatever.
wasn't making 160 anymore. Like that wasn't even an option, you know.
Absolutely not. So like it made it easier, I guess, for guys to try to pad Duran's record. But Duran was just, again, on the circuit, beating up a bunch of dudes on Tuesday night fights and other random locations and stuff like that. But he would get those
And
random
on and
fights.
off TV too.
Sure. But I think the main difference between the Pazienza fights and the Camacho fights and between and that and the Joppy is that Joppy had the potential of actually hurting Duran. Pazden wasn't going to hurt Duran, and fucking Camacho certainly wasn't going to hurt Duran. But Joppy being in his prime, a young champion who, like, at that point, you gotta be fair. That dude had some combinations. It was a good fighter back then.
Yeah,
It
he
was
had
just
quick
like,
hands. Yeah.
yeah. it was just like, why? Why is this fight being made? What was the point of it? And going back and looking at records and stuff like that, like Duran, had an underrated win over Jorge Castro around that time, I guess, or maybe a year or two before that, whatever. But like other than that, there is nothing on his record that like gives him a deserving for a title shot. But he's like, yeah, yeah, why are you gonna do that? And like you said, it was just a really shitty, weird card. The Hopkins Allen fight ends inconclusively with Hopkins falling out of the ring and just a fiasco following that. And they're asking Ferdy Pacheco before the fight, who obviously had been around and watched Duran's career forever and fought and covered it because like him being an announcer and everything like that, he was really like solemn about it. He was like, I don't like this at all. He was like, I'm not sure why he's here for getting a title fight and whatever, but here we are, and I just certainly hope he doesn't get hurt too badly. He was like, that's all. He was like, that's all we can hurt for, like hope for. And they're like, do you think he can be like competitive at all? And he was like, I mean, he's experienced, but like, no, there's just no way he's gonna be able to do anything. And then they're showing like the clips before it too, like the pre-fight clips of like when they're trying to, okay, this is what Duran needs to do, and they were showing him a highlight of him against Camacho, and bro, it was so bad. He's like, misses it completely. And then he catches the next one, but it was just like some weird shit. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. And well, you've seen it, man. I mean, it's still on YouTube.
It's funny too because the anniversary was just a few days ago too. And so
Yeah.
I watched it a few days ago because usually if I talk about a fight at all, I don't like talking about shit that I haven't seen if I haven't seen it in a
Sure.
while or whatever. But long story short, watched it a few days ago. Yeah, bro. Durant just looks like he looks shot. He looks washed. He looks like it's not like a few years earlier, like you just said, like it's night and day. Like he definitely lost it by this point. He was still kind of viable. He's doing all right. And then by Joppy was like the first solid punch he landed. Duran was like, whoa, and it's like going to hold on. He's like, fuck that. And you could see that he's actually doing a really good job of just instinctually playing defense against the ropes. But
Yeah.
even then, Joppy's way too fast and still just clipping him, just like clip, 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 clip. And Duran's like, avoiding some shit, using his smarts, but it's sad, bro. Like it's exactly the type of shit where you're watching and just shaking your head, just going, damn.
And Don
Damn.
King that card too.
Damn,
And
bro.
it stinks because like you almost there's a couple of times when you see Duran look at Joppy during the fight, right? And it's almost like you can see in his eyes, and you
He's
can
like
almost see
15
him
years ago, I would have eaten you alive, bro.
absolutely, right? Like he's just thinking to himself, "You're so fucking lucky. I'm so old right now because like if this was only a few years ago, I would beat the fucking daylights out of you. Like you ain't shit." Like he still had that like look on him, like Joppy wasn't doing anything to him because he probably really thought he wasn't shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
exactly. He was getting caught on the ropes, and it was like between the punches, he was giving him this look like, bro, this is not shit. I'm just old. God damn
he,
it.
he was like, "You're just so lucky. I'm just so old." Yeah, like, I mean, it's too bad because like the Duran from even the first Pazienza fight probably would have been much more competitive. I mean, who
I'm,
knows?
and I'm not, and I know that there was almost an entire 10 years between like when like the sparring footage of Roberto Duran and Nigel Benn.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Even that fucking, are you kidding me, bro? That version of Duran would have been fucking laughing at Joppy. It would have been like, yeah.
That's
He
what's
was
up.
like, he's like spinning Ben around in the fucking ring and shit. He's just like, dude, Olay, and all this type of shit during the sparring, bro. He would have been laughing at Joppy.
And that's why he's one of the most natural fighters in history, and why he's rated in the top 10, sometimes higher than his contemporaries. Like I know some
That
people
fool was
like, oh, shit,
embarrassing
but it's
Nigel
way
Ben
higher.
so that fool was embarrassing Nigel Ben so bad during sparring that he was apologizing to him during the sparring. He was like
And he's
spinning him
bad as
around
fuck
and going like, my
too.
bad, my bad, my bad. It's like, who does that? Like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to embarrass you this badly. Like, Jesus Christ.
And Duran was round during that time too, man. You can tell he
Yeah,
was
he had a gut.
not.
Fool looked
But
like somebody's uncle. Nah,
seriously.
he had a bunch of unnecessary ones there at the end, which I mean is just the trajectory of a great fighter, unfortunately. But he
Mean,
had a couple good
listen, I
ones.
know that a lot of people try to like long, term world champions always get that one last chance sometimes. Like Duran got that. Larry Holmes had his against McCall and almost pulled it off. Foreman got a few of them before he finally turned the trick. And then, like we said, you want to go to like, lower weight fighters that sometimes they have that one last chance that they're able to turn it on, even if they don't win, they're able to like pull back their hands of time a little bit, and like even if they're washed, like they're so motivated trying to win a belt again that they like Junior Jones when he fought Paul Engel, remember? Like Jones, look how bad Jones had looked in his subsequent fights. He had no legs, anything like that. And he was clearly shock worn. But for whatever reason in that fight, he turned it back a little bit, dropped Engel, and gave him a hell of a fight before he eventually, fell with it and fell apart. Um, Classic examples of other dudes, just go way back in history. There's always stuff like that. But it's just the saddest though when you see a dude like Duran, who's an all-time great, and he fighting a guy like Joppy again, who was a good fighter, but not a great fighter. Just a person that personified the morbid what's the word? Not morbid, fucking morbid down, whatever. The shitty the shitty middleweight division of that era. And
Moribund. There you go.
more, that's the word. That's the word I was trying to think about. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, it just was unnecessary. I still even don't know why it was made. I don't remember if Duran was ranked for it, whatever it was, but like Showtime was kind of in line to televise that they were forced to, and that just wasn't one of their high points.
Well, the WBA, right or wrong, has often been seen as an organization that panders to or caters to a lot of Latino fighters. Well, I will specifically Central and South American fighters too, not necessarily North American like Mexican fighters, but right or wrong, a lot of
Yeah.
people have made that accusation over the years, and that would seem to fall in line since Joppy was a WBA champion. It seemed to kind of fall in line with that idea. And also on top of that, Joppy was kind of like a good fighter, like you said, but kind of just ruling this little wing of the middleweight division that was not particularly good, kind of playing the mandatory game. And while he held the belt for a while, never really faced anybody all that good. I think it was Julio Cesar Green was probably like his best fucking.
And
I'm
that was
trying
a
to think of somebody else. Was there anybody else that he like? He fought a number of fighters. I'm just trying to think of anybody good. Is the point?
I mean, the guy he beat the belt for was pretty good. Takahara, he was a good fighter.
That was
Um,
probably the best fight. Yeah,
yeah,
but I
because
mean,
other than that, he
he
lost
kind
to
of just
Julio
held on to the belt for a bit.
Cesar Green their first fight, and that just again, no one wanted to see a trilogy of that, and we were force fed that. He never fought Keith Holmes. He ended up fighting Hopkins too late and got blood.
Yeah,
Ended up looking
basically
like
didn't unify. Was forced into well, not maybe not forced into the tournament, but went in the tournament because he was a Don King fighter in a Don King tournament. So that's what Don King
also,
did.
also too, man, you got to think it's boxing in general, right? And I mean, it's kind of sad that everything comes full circle because Duran gets sacrificed to Joppy at the end, right? And just takes a beating, albeit it wasn't that bad of a beating. It gets mercifully stopped in 3 rounds, so it could have been worse, but it happens. And then years later, Joppy is kind of in the same position as Duran, being used as like a sacrificial lamb, either for like a guy like Jermaine Taylor or somehow again gets a title fight, I think against like Lucian Bute or something like that, near the end of his career. What was he doing in a title fight at that point? You know what I mean? Completely washed and got pummeled. Like, unless you get out early, it kind of happens to everybody.
I remember after, dude, his face was so swelled up after the Hopkins fight that I remember somebody said he looked like he went bobbing for bees nests. It's like, holy shit. I don't know what that did. I don't know what injuries he had, if anything, but that fool's face was like
No, yeah,
after the
sure.
Hopkins fight. Anyway, no, Roberto Duran had a number of them, dude. So that's a good fighter to kind of end it on, because especially because Roberto Duran, kind of like Muhammad Ali, his career was so long that he's like a link, a big link in a lot of different kind of generational chains. It's like when you play that box rec game where we've talked about, you try to link different fighters. Roberto Duran's a big one. Roberto Duran's one of the fucking, the mystery cards that you get, and you're like, yes, you could fucking go anywhere now.
Um, I guess if you just want to like say some honorable mentions, I just have like two off the top of my head. Like you have Riddick Bowe, Michael Dokes. Why was Michael Dokes in a heavyweight title fight at Madison Square Garden? I'll never know. And but the thing is, he still had two hilarious, sad but hilarious moments in that fight. The first one is before the fight when he was quoted, he's eating a giant plate of pasta, and he goes, "The past." He was like, "My past is history. The future's not here now, and the present is linguine and clam sauce." And then after he gets stopped in the first round, Larry Merchant asked him, he was like, "What do you think about this?" And blah 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 blah. And he was like, "Larry, No, yeah, he goes, Larry, you always been known as a jackass. He was like, fuck. Well, he was like, what do you think happened? And so after getting called a jackass, Larry brought up on purpose his fucking fight with Mike Weaver. The first one I stopped early, and that got Dokes even more pissed off. But that one, the Jesse Ferguson fight also, I guess, because I know why Ferguson got the title fight, but at the same time, was it really necessary for that? No, not at all, you know? And I guess to a degree, man, fucking Sugar Ray Leonard, Hector Camacho. Even though a lot of people thought Leonard was going to win that fight, just in retrospect, the whole fucking ugh.
Yeah, well, that's just how shot Leonard was, dude. Is they thought that so even though it was so far above Camacho's optimal weight, obviously that was oh yeah, dude, that shit was bad, dude. Floored him, bad
Made him
fight,
look like
sad
Mike
fight,
Tyson out there. It was bad to see. Dude. Bloodied him, stopped him. Yeah,
yeah, fucking wild. Yeah, I mean, look, dude, boxing is filled with those kinds of fights. Obviously, we just talked for like 2 hours about them, and we're just kind of riffing off a handful of fighters. You could go forever. And boxing is filled with these kinds of fights, both fortunately in terms of conversation and comedy, but also unfortunately in terms of the trajectory, a lot of fighters' careers and what it meant for them taking damage and stuff like that too. Um, but yeah, I mean, needless to say, we're not going to be able to stop unnecessary fights. They are a part of this sport.
as long as there's mandatory challengers and matchmakers willing to pad records for their fighters, there's going to be a lot of unnecessary head scratches we're going to be seeing, especially because everything is televised. It's going to be right there in real time for us to watch.
And who knows, man? You get enough fucking dictators from foreign countries just pumping millions of dollars into the sport. Who knows what you're going to see? Who knows?
Apparently, we're going to be seeing a boxing league pretty soon. So there we go.
Wank. Fucking wank. Jesus Christ, people. Anyway, hey, man.
Yep.
Always a fucking good time talking history with you, bro.
Same here.
Always a good time. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, whether you watched or listened. Thank you. Go ahead and subscribe, whichever it is. If you listened in to the podcast, click subscribe, rating, comment. If you watch the podcast on YouTube, subscribe, rating, comment, all those kinds of things. If you are on social media, we're both on social media, various places and whatever. But the Knuckles and Gloves podcast, importantly, is also on Facebook, in Instagram, kind of X, whatever. Anyway, go seek us out. You'll find us places. Aris, we'll talk soon, bro.
Have a good one, yeah.